Hey everyone, Corey here. Welcome to episode 250 of the Sports Ballers podcast. I'm super excited to be the host this week because we get to talk about one of my favorite things in the world, fantasy football. We'll be using our consensus rankings to cover players we have disagreements about. We'll talk about the methodology behind our individual rankings, strategy for drafting, and in-season best practices, plus settings and other elements we love or hate in fantasy football. Strap in for a great show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sports Ballers podcast. I'm Corey Puffett, your host for this evening, joined as always by Eric Meyer and Evan Ash. How we doing, fellas?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Doing well. For those of you who maybe didn't hear the little electronic sound in Evan's voice, for the first time in a while, he is remote. But we are all here. Eric, how are you doing?
Pretty good. I've got a draft starting in an hour and 15 minutes, so I will be doing it live, F-its, as some would say. So that'll be an interesting little wrinkle to this fantasy football preview. I will be living it and breathing it in the moment for y'all, so y'all can find out how much I suck at this while it's going on.
You can also get advice from your co-hosts. You can get advice from our consensus rankings, which we're going to go over tonight.
It's a standard league, though, so,
Well, then our consensus rankings might not do you all that much good.
That's why I had to print these other rankings that, I'm
Why are you in a standard league?
I don't make the rules, man. This is a work league. Somebody invited me a few years ago, and I've just been here. I'm not going to make them change the rules.
You should.
I mean, okay. I won money off these people 2 years ago. I'm going to try to do it again, you know?
So, today is really a fantasy football focused show, and I don't think anybody put any other notes in our show notes. Does anybody have anything they want to say about the Orioles before we get into fantasy football this week? I know I don't have a whole lot I want to say about my Yankees.
I didn't know we were supposed to put stuff in there. I thought this was the fantasy show.
I mean, it is.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot.
But next week is also the NFL show.
The Orioles are still winning, and Evan still thinks they suck. The only real news is that Felix Bautista got hurt. Still waiting on the prognosis on him, but, you hear UCL injury, and I've never heard of a UCL injury that didn't require Tommy John, so you barely even hear of a forearm injury. You hear forearm soreness, you're like, okay, that means Tommy John. That's what happened to Jacob deGrom earlier this year, so... it's not looking good. I would assume he's not going to pitch the rest of this year, and I'm sure that at some point, either shortly into the offseason or maybe in the next couple of weeks, they're ultimately just going to bite the bullet and say he needs to go under the knife and he won't be available all of next year either. So, obviously sad news. He's been the best reliever in baseball. He's one of the best guys on the team, but that's life in the Major League Baseball. You just got to move on. So Hopefully the Orioles can pick up the slack. I don't expect them to be able to because he's great, but it's next man up.
Yep. You guys still do have 2.5 games on the Rays. Yankees continue to lose 3-7 in the last 10. They're now 19 games behind the Orioles, 5.5 games behind the Red Sox, who are in 4th place in the division and 11 games out of the wild card.
Y'all are done.
Yeah, we're done. All right, well then let's go ahead and just dive right into fantasy football. It is that time of year again, ladies and gentlemen. Super exciting. Really looking forward to getting these drafts underway. I've got my first draft on Thursday for my work league. It's a full PPR league. Not a big fan of full PPR, but I tried to move it down to half last year, and the other people turned me down. So here we are. And then we have our league of record on Sunday evening. That should be a lot of fun. We're going to try something a little bit different this year. But let's dive first and foremost into some thoughts on our consensus rankings. So those of you who did not see our Twitter post, our Facebook post earlier in the day, our blog is alive again. It is resurrected for the football season. We posted our consensus top 150 players today. And unlike last year, we also drew a page from our older books and went ahead and broke down the positional rankings as well. Evan brought up a really good point the other day that a lot of people, including him, find more value in tiered positional rankings rather than the consensus top 150. And I mean, quite honestly, I do too. I think that it's really important when you go into your drafts and you're thinking about what you the strategy that you're going to use and what players to target. You want to think about tiers at each position. And so that's also what I've done is I've gone by each position and I've kind of tiered them out. And some tiers might only have 2 players, some might have 6 or 8. But you want to be able to see I have this many players left that I think are this close together. Meanwhile, in this other position, I only have 1 left in this upper tier that's remaining. So I kind of need to target that guy because there's probably going to be somebody that I like at the other position later. So we have that for you as well on our blog. You can check that out at thesportsballers.com. Again, just thesportsballers.com. And if you are listening live on YouTube, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions over the course of the show, just go ahead and put them in that live chat and we'll get to them. So firstly, I want to talk to you guys about your methodology. How do you go about ranking players when you're preparing for a fantasy football league? Because I tried something a little bit different than I've done in the past this year. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But Evan, let's start with you. How do you go about creating your rankings?
Well, I start with my boy Matthew Berry.
Your boy, yes.
Of course. So I just copy and paste his rankings into a Word document just so I can have all the players' names written somewhere so I don't have to type them up myself. And then, I just sort of tweak some formatting, to make it look how I want. And then I start moving guys around based on opinions and stuff that I've heard in various hunches that I have. I didn't go through and let me stat out all the guys and, I heard from a source at such and such. And no, I'm not going through all that. But I think I came up with some decent rankings and more importantly, some pretty good tiers as well.
Okay. Eric, how do you prepare for your drafts? How do you go about ranking players?
I mean, sort of a similar fashion to Evan. I don't necessarily use Matthew Berry as a starting point. I use Fantasy Pros, their consensus rankings, which Barry contributes to because he's one of the experts.
Yep.
But I like to get a better, mix of people, like kind of diversifying the portfolio a bit so you're not kind of relying on one guy. But the whole point of it is just to have the names on a list because I don't want to sit there and try to I might legitimately forget a player exists. If I'm ranking somebody, if I have to go pick each guy out of a hat, I might forget that Jalen Hurts plays quarterback for the Eagles for all I know. Things like that can happen. You just get lost in the sauce when you're ranking hundreds of people. So you got to have a good starting point there, and you kind of let the experts who do this and get paid to do this kind of be your starting point. And then, I generally tweak it a little bit here and there, but that's not the most important part to me. The more important part to me is kind of figuring out where I'm drafting for each pick. And with our league, it's a little more complicated with the keepers, so you have to account for...
And some traded picks here and there as well.
Yeah, traded picks, and you also have to account for, okay, this guy's being kept, so he's off the board, but when does that keeper, when does that pick actually convey later on? So then okay, this is where I'm actually going to be picking around the ranking, and then you kind of circle that, or at least I do, and kind of get an idea of what position group is going to be hot at that time, and that's kind of how I plan out, okay, can I get a player later? If there's a running back available in the second round, but I know there's going to be a bunch in the third round, and the wide receivers that, there's going to be 15 picks between my next picks. I don't want to take a running back there because then I'm not going to get any good receivers. Whereas I know I can get a good running back at good value in the third round, so maybe I take a receiver at that situation.
So you don't necessarily put quite as much stock into where different players are ranked, who's ahead of who, other than maybe just general areas. So, obviously you're not going to have Cooper Kupp down in the 50s or some crazy thing like that, because you want to keep track. Right, you want to keep track of where those guys should be going, but you're more worried about thinking what positions are probably going to be drafted in what rounds, so that you can kind of plan out that way.
Yeah, and the reason is because let's face it, if you've got say CeeDee Lamb versus AJ Brown, right? They played the same position and they're both really good. You're going to be happy with either of those guys. Which one you pick is kind of a crapshoot, and you don't really know what's going to happen over the course of the year. One of them might get hurt or something like that. That's just something you can't predict.
Do you have any sort of method for trying to break those ties where you're sitting there and clearly the best route to take would be to take a wide receiver. You've got both AJ Brown and CeeDee Lamb. You don't have anybody else in that same tier. How do you decide which one you're going to take in that situation if both are available?
It depends on what my roster looks like at that point. But if I've got guys that I know are consistently going to get me high floor, then I'm going to lean towards more of a touchdown guy who's going to be a little more boom or bust, because I can have that guy could put me over the top if I'm in like a real shootout. But, if I've got a roster of, if I'm not really happy with my picks, then I might want the more consistent guy, like the possession receiver that gets a lot of catches and racks up a lot of yards. So that's sort of where I go. Like, example, the year that I won the title in this league, yeah. I mean, I knew I had David Johnson, so obviously happy there. But I also...
How did you get David Johnson?
Yes, just to remind our audience, people in our audience, how you got David Johnson.
Because somebody else had him as an option as a keeper that year.
And decided not to keep
him. And decided to trade him for pennies on the dollar. I learned my lesson.
Yeah, so, but in that specific draft, I knew that he was going to be my horse already.
Yeah.
And so I kind of said, okay, my first round pick came up, and I kind of had a ranking tie, if you will. Actually had Keenan Allen one spot ahead of Mike Evans. But I picked Mike Evans because I'm like, well, I want the touchdown guy, right? Like, he's going to get me a bunch of points in a big way. I don't have to worry about if he has a bad game, okay, but I got David Johnson, right? He's going to be able to get me to a level where I'm in the game. I want the guy that's going to put me over the top.
Interesting.
And, of course, totally irrelevant to my strategy there, Keenan Allen tore his ACL in week 1, and Mike Evans ended up being the best receiver in the league for most of the year until Antonio Brown got hot and caught him. But, it still was – I felt like it worked out because he racked up a lot of touchdowns that year. He did what I wanted him to do. So, I kind of took the strategy of receivers at this point because I also drafted Brandon Cooks later with an early second-round pick. He was another guy who he's going to catch a 50-yard touchdown pass, or he might not do much at all, but having that boom factor in your lineup can really make it happen. So it really just depends on your roster. I know I said a lot of words there.
Yeah. And I mean, we were going to talk a little bit about draft strategy and tips a little bit later in the show, but you kind of just jumped right into it, and that's great. I'm going to talk just a little bit about my methodology. So the reason that I wanted to kind of start with this is because for anybody who goes and looks at our rankings on our webpage, if you're not really interested in seeing like the consensus rankings and just the average of each of us, maybe you want to just go with one of our rankings if you feel like our methodology is more in line with the way that you like to draft. So I wanted to kind of lead with that. So talking about my methodology for my rankings, I essentially started a few weeks back going team by team and projecting stats for the season. I looked at what were the what were their rushing rates and their passing rates of each offense last year. What coaching changes were made, what player personnel changes were made. Do I feel like they're going to be a little bit more run heavy this year, a little bit more pass heavy this year? And so I adjusted the percentages and tried to get a good sense of roughly how many plays they would run. So I had an idea of how many pass attempts there would be for the year, how many rush attempts there would be for a year, and then I kind of distributed them around the roster. And I got through like 8 teams like that, and I was like, this is very tedious. And as much as I really enjoy working with numbers, I mean, you guys know that everything I do with our fantasy league, I love living in spreadsheets, because if I didn't love it, I'd be driving myself mad doing all this. But I didn't think that I was quite going to have enough time to get through all 32 teams. So I went on to Fantasy Pros and I looked at they have stat projections on Fantasy Pros. And I noticed that most of the players for the teams I had already statted out, the stats that were being projected in Fantasy Pros were actually pretty similar to the ones that I was coming up with by myself. So I basically just kind of took Fantasy Pros stat projections for every player on the 32 teams, made a few small adjustments here and there where I thought that maybe they were estimating how much a player was going to contribute, what a player's target share was going to be in an offense, things like that. But more or less my rankings kind of come from those projections, and then using those to determine how many points I figured players are going to score over the course of the season. From there, I put them. I took those totals in a spreadsheet. I separated them out by position, and then I basically said if I'm in a 12-team league, and I'm starting 12 quarterbacks, I'm starting 12 tight ends. I've got 24 running backs and wide receivers plus another 12 flex. I figured out how many, took all the wide receivers and running backs outside the top 24 at their positions, ordered them by how many points they were going to score over the year based on my projections, and then said, the top 12 of those guys are going to be the flex guys for the year. And then I determined what is their value over replacement at their position. And I basically ordered them like that. So I did all my, all my starters, and then I took all the first string backups at each position and I put them behind them. But I assigned them a value to see, okay, what's their value compared to the rest of the guys at their position, so that I know, is Travis Kelce actually worth the first overall pick as an example, right? Because it feels like he could be, considering teams that have Travis Kelce always wind up being, in at least the playoffs, if not the championship game at most leagues, because he's so much more valuable than other tight ends. But is he that much more valuable that it makes sense to take him over a Christian McCaffrey, over a Justin Jefferson, over a Cooper Kupp? And the answer was, in some leagues it gets close, depending on the settings, but there is not a league that I am in or that I am privy to that has settings where it actually makes sense to take him 101.
Right. I kind of understand what you're saying there. I've thought about this a couple of years ago because I kind of did the same thing and looked at, the best tight end in the league normally has a higher differential from the average tight end across the board, like Travis Kelce, for example. But I think the reason why it starts to equalize when you look at the top running backs is because you only have one tight end spot.
Right.
So if he's 8 points above replacement or average or whatever baseline you use, okay, but that's the only value you're getting out of the tight end spot.
And so I use a multiplier where it's basically, okay, so if I'm starting what is that? So like 84 offensive players, I believe is what is it 84 or is it 72?
Well, we have 7 offensive players and we have 12 teams.
So 84.
So 84
yeah. So basically, a tight end's value is then weighted at 12 out of 84 or 1 out of 7. Right. A running back, if you've got 24 running backs plus, say, 6, then each of them is then they have a multiplier of 30 over 84. So their multiplier is much bigger than the tight ends. So exactly what you're saying, you have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, you just have to. Another way to think about it, if that nerdy math stuff doesn't compute, is when you draft a running back, it makes your first running back slot good, but it also improves your second running back spot. Because if you don't draft him, then you're losing the opportunity to fill that spot, and then the next running back you draft will have to fill that spot, which that would possibly be your number 2. So you're really making 2 positions better by drafting that running back, whereas the tight end, you're only making 1 position better.
Exactly. So there definitely does come a point where it makes sense to take, Travis Kelce potentially as a first rounder. I mean, I know that you and Evan you have him at 8, Evan has him at 9. But based on my projections using standard 12-team half-point PPR, I wound up having him at 18 based on that valuation.
18?
Yeah, so when you look at that, if you're like, wait a second, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, mathematically it does. Now, will that actually hold up? Could he be that much more valuable? Sure, he could be. There have been years where he probably was that much more valuable. But when you take into consideration that there are other good tight end options that are not quite at that level, but also not guaranteed not to be. Think about 2 years ago. Travis Kelce was not the number 1 tight end in fantasy football. Mark Andrews was.
Yep.
Last year, Mark Andrews was ahead of Travis Kelce until Lamar Jackson got hurt, and he got hurt. So it's also not a guarantee that Travis Kelce is the number 1 tight end in fantasy this year, which I think also potentially diminishes his value just a little bit, because you can get another tight end a round or 2 later than him. and fill that position while still making sure that you've taken care of that top wide receiver and or that top running back spot.
My thinking, though, on this is like, I feel like Travis Kelce, I mean, again, I feel, right? Like Travis Kelce is head and shoulders above all the other guys. Because, like, say you pass on him in the first round, it's kind of a desolate wasteland after the next, like, 5-ish tight ends, to the point
Sure.
where, you're just praying the guy catches a touchdown that particular week.
Sure.
So, if you'd like to avoid that, disaster every week of, is Jake Ferguson or Jawan Johnson or Sam Laporta, is this guy going to catch a touchdown?
Or Peyton
Or is
Hendershot.
Kyle Pitts going to get thrown the ball one time? You're just praying that happens. I would rather,
No,
give
I
me-
mean
give
you're
Travis Kelce
absolutely
in the first round.
you're absolutely right in a sense, but you have to keep in mind again, there is a reason why Travis Kelce has a much higher valuation even in my rankings than a lot of other tight ends. Like a lot of my tight ends are closer to the bottom of my top 84 in rankings. But, or not bottom 84, but closer to my number 84 in my rankings. But you do have a few other options that you can get at a discount who are not going to be that much worse than Travis Kelce compared to if you don't have one of those top running backs. As Eric said, you're now moving a RB2 into your RB1 spot, and therefore you're also going to be moving an RB3 into your RB2 spot. So both your RB1 is worse than it should have been, and your RB2 is worse than it should have been.
Yeah, there's always a give take. There's an opportunity cost for every pick.
Yeah,
right?
like because you can also look at it as your RB2 is like your second or your top RB who's an RB2 is now your RB2, but then your second RB2 who's really an RB3 is now your RB1. So either way, you're losing two rounds of value at that position.
Yeah, it's just a matter of how much more valuable is having two better running backs. Like like if you have a running back in the first and second round versus the second and third, what's the drop off compared to having, say, Travis Kelce versus like an average tight end?
Right.
Because I assume if you don't pick Travis Kelce in the first round, you're probably not picking a tight end until like later in the draft when you just get into the mishmash of average tight ends.
And that certainly is a risk that you take because, if somebody else takes Travis Kelce before you get him or after you pass up the opportunity to get him, there is a decent chance, and it's happened in several of my mock drafts where, the other good tight ends are also going a little bit higher than you value them at, higher than you want them to go, which means that you probably are going to get into a situation where you're just kind of throwing a dart and you're hoping that it sticks.
Yep.
I've had a couple of mock drafts where I've wound up with Taysom Hill, and I don't love Taysom Hill. To be fair, Taysom Hill is ranked a lot higher in my rankings than he is in your guys' rankings. But that is one small flaw with my rankings, is that there is a decent chance that he finishes, if not as a top 12 tight end, at least close to it. But the route to get there is probably not going to be good if you look at his history, because it's probably going to be a couple of games where he scores like 25 to 30 points. And then all of the other games, he's going to get you between 3 and 7 points.
Yeah, because there are games where he gets
or occasionally 0.
There are games he's going to have where he gets maybe like 10 snaps and he just doesn't do anything with them.
So the question is, what's better when you're waiting that long on tight end? Is it to have a consistent, 8 to 9 points? You're really never going to go over 15, but you're hopefully never going to go below 4 or 5. Or is it the guy who's going to give you some duds where he's only giving you 3 points, but he can also win you a week or two along the way? And it's a tough decision. It's not a decision that I love making when I do put him on my team, and there's a good chance that I would not do that in an actual league. But for my fantasy, for my mock drafts, I'm just kind of looking at how is my roster construction looking based on this.
Yeah, and just one last thing about drafting a tight end is the risk that comes with it. Tight ends are one of the most injury-prone positions on the field. And if, like we talked about, the opportunity cost of drafting one early, your down roster strength is going to be significantly weakened at just about every position because you picked a tight end. So that tight end has to be available every week and produce. And if he gets hurt, there's nothing more crippling to a season than that. Like, you can recover from an injury to your first round pick if it's a running back because you have a stable of running backs. But you went after a tight end because he has such an advantage on everybody else. If he disappears, now you don't have that roster strength to make up the gap, and you're sure as hell not going to find another tight end to replace his production at any capacity. So at that point, your season's basically over. But if you do have him and you hit some gems on the other picks, you're probably winning the title. So it's it's certainly a boom or bust strategy to go tight end early, but you just have to be aware of the risks you're taking with it, because it will pay off if the guy stays healthy and is productive, which, to Travis Kelce's credit, he has been remarkably healthy and remarkably productive, even though he's now like 34. So, but just the question is, how long is he going to hold up? I mean, he's playing football after all.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the spots in our rankings that we have some disagreements on. Some of the players where we're pretty far apart, just so that we can get a better sense of why we ranked them this way. And so our listeners, if they're using our rankings or at least glancing at them, they have an idea of the context that these rankings are coming with. So one of the first players where there's a pretty interesting spread is our consensus number 16 player, our wide receiver 8, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. I have him right about where we have him on our consensus. I have him ranked number 15. Evan has him ranked 9 spots ahead of me at number 6 overall, and Eric has him 12 spots behind me at number 27 overall. So I'm kind of right in the middle. I don't feel like I necessarily have a whole lot of explaining to do. I want to hear why such a big range between the two of you. And because I am a Detroit Lions fan now, I want to save the best for last. I want to save the more optimistic outlook for last. I'm going to start with Eric. Why number 27?
I don't know. It might just be my Lions pessimism from, them being
the last 70 years.
Yeah, a generation over generation failure, right? Like, one playoff win since Kennedy was alive. So, that comes with a little bit. I thought you saw at times last year where Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of, I don't want to say regressed, but he got a little bit, in a fantasy slump, I'll put it that way, where he just didn't seem to have the same level of production. I think he's a great player. I think he's going to put up points, but he's just a guy I looked at and said, obviously, I'm glad to take him if he falls to me at that spot. Like, if he's a late second round pick, which I'm sure he won't be, then I would be glad to have him. But I worry about just a little bit of the hype catching up to this Lions team. I mean, his quarterback is still Jared Goff, and while Goff was very, very good last year, we know that Goff can turn into a pumpkin. There just is a little bit of risk for him at the receiver position for me to really be gung-ho about taking him really early.
Evan only has 5 players ranked ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's got Christian McCaffrey 1, Austin Eckler 2, Justin Jefferson 3, Jamar Chase 4, and Cooper Kupp 5. And then it's Amon-Ra St. Brown. Here are some wide receivers that he has behind St. Brown. Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill. He's also got the guy that we just got done talking about a lot, Travis Kelce, behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. So, Evan, what tells you that Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to have that big of a breakout season?
A breakout season? He already broke out like 2 years ago.
This would be a significant step up. That it would make what he did before look like just, his average, or maybe even his below average. Like, this would be a breakout from the breakout, if you will.
Well, anyway, the Lions defense is still terrible, so they're going to be in shootouts every single week. They play at least half their games inside. And, Jared Goff is okay, but at times I felt like Amon-Ra St. Brown was just unstoppable. And, every time the red zone would cut to the Lions game, I'm just like, oh no, am I facing this guy again? So, I mean, that's why I want to pick him. I feel like Diggs and Hill, might be a little limited sometimes. Like the Bills' offense, disappeared. Is Tua Tagovailoa going to stay healthy all year? Devontae Adams hates the Raiders now or something. Obviously, his best friend of all time, Derek Carr, is gone after 1 year of the two of them together, maybe 2.
1 year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one
just
year.
one. So like, I thought he was better than those guys.
The thing that concerns me a little bit about that theory is that while I agree that the Lions defense did not get that much better, especially considering the biggest position of need entering the draft was defensive tackle, and we saw what they did in the first round on our show. They took
Drafted a running back.
they took Jahmyr Gibbs, who I think Jahmyr Gibbs is a really good player.
Yeah.
I'm not angry at the team for taking him, but it definitely limited the amount that they could improve the defense. With that being said, when I looked just to kind of get a sense of defenses that I would be interested in taking for fantasy, I basically projected out who do I think are going to be like the 8 strongest offenses in the NFL, and who do I think are going to be the 8 weakest offenses in the NFL, so that I can get a sense of what teams have have more good matchups and have more bad matchups. The only 2 games that Detroit is playing against a team that I have projected as a top 8 offense, week 1 against Baltimore, and then week 1 against Kansas City, and then week 7 against Baltimore. The next closest team is week 10 against the Chargers. But outside of that, they've got Seattle, Atlanta, Green Bay, Carolina, Las Vegas, Chicago, New Orleans. Like, they've got a pretty good schedule all told. So I don't necessarily think that their defense is not going to be great, but that doesn't automatically mean that they're going to be in a lot of shootouts.
It should also be noted that last year's Lions defense got a lot better as the season went on.
That's
right?
true
like
too.
They were terrible in the first 8 weeks or so. I think they started 1-6 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like they were losing by like games like 40-30 like every week it seemed. But then they kind of buttoned it up. They weren't great, but they held teams to 20 points a game over the course of like the second half of the season. And in today's NFL, that's not bad, especially when you're also putting up a bunch of points.
That's better than the average.
It's not like they were a possession-based team. They were an explosive team that went down and scored quickly. And so that gives the opponent more opportunities to score on you, and they still held people to 20 points. I think that the defense, it might not have improved from last January to this September, but it's certainly improved from the average of last year to this September. So I think that Lions defense might be just a little better than we're giving them credit for.
Just a few spots below Amon-Ra on our rankings. Number 19, Josh Jacobs, our RB9. Eric and I have him in a pretty similar place. Eric has him 13, I have him 16. Evan's got him at 34, and we did these rankings after the news that Josh Jacobs had signed the 1-year deal worth, I believe, $11 million with the Raiders.
It was 12.
It was at 12?
Yeah.
Oh, because Saquon got 11. And I think
none of it makes any sense anyway. They should have just signed the tag.
They should have. But in any case, Evan, I know going into last year, all 3 of us were pretty low on Josh Jacobs, much to all of our embarrassments, because he wound up being amazing. But yes, to be fair, it wasn't just us. It was everyone. Why aren't you on board, Evan?
I mean, the overall rankings, I didn't really, put too much stock in those. I have Josh Jacobs as my 9th running back.
That's fair, and we have him as our 8th. So I'm giving you a little bit of a hard time, but it's kind of weird that there would be that big of a discrepancy in our overall rankings between the RB8 and the RB9. So I guess my next question would be, does that mean that you are drawing a really hard tier at your number 8 running back, Derrick Henry, back to number 9 at Josh Jacobs, where you are fitting in that many other players?
Yes. I do have a tier break there.
So you have a tier break there, but just so that we're thinking about this, again, you have Josh Jacobs number 34 overall. You have Derrick Henry at 15 overall. That means that you are fitting in 19 other players between the 2 of them on your overall rankings. Why do you have so many non-running backs in between those 2? I guess would be my question.
Because I was tired and, needed to put this thing together quickly.
I was expecting like actually well thought out answer, like a good rationale. I was tired.
Yeah, I was tired.
I was tired, and
Josh
Corey was
Jacobs
making me
is
do
at
this.
is at the top of the running back tier for me that I have, some questions about. Like Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor. Like, they're not as big of guarantees to me as your Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry types.
To be fair, for all we know, this could be the year that Derrick Henry just falls off a cliff.
That's what he was saying last 5
he has
years.
carried the ball a lot over the past several years, and I get it. We've been saying this for a long time, so it's become. I think that we've gotten to a point where we're almost taking it for granted that Derrick Henry is just always going to be that kind of guy. But keep in mind, last year his efficiency ratings went down pretty significantly from previous years, and we've seen plenty of running backs over the past decade who don't just ease down the cliff, they fall off it.
Like DeMarco Murray disappeared.
There's been a number of them, and it doesn't always have to do with injury. A lot of times it is, but not always. So, to say that there's like a guarantee at Derrick Henry and then suddenly not a guarantee at Josh Jacobs, I don't know that I completely agree with that. I will say
not
that
a Josh Jacobs guy. Okay,
fair enough.
Carry all the previous years, right, of pain and anguish, watching this guy just be a complete bum, and then I was like, oh, he's great, and I'm supposed to just, let's put him right at the top with Christian McCaffrey. I'm like, I don't know about that.
We do have to talk about Jonathan Taylor. Currently, he's on our rankings number 21 consensus. I have him right at 21. Evan has him at 37, which is probably, honestly, still too high after the news that we got today that he is expected to start the season on the PUP and be ineligible to play until at least week 4. Eric had him as his number 10 overall player on his rankings. What are you doing about Jonathan Taylor at this point, Eric?
Well, obviously, if he's missing 3 or 4 weeks of play, I'm significantly lowering him on the rankings.
So how much are you thinking?
I mean, that's for the fantasy season. We play 14 regular season games.
Depending on your league, you might play between 13 and 15.
Well, I'm going to do it based on what we do.
We play 15 because we only have two of our 12 teams make the playoff, or 4 of our 12 teams make the playoffs. Most leagues are probably going to be 14 weeks.
Yeah. So either way, he's missing close to 80% of the season, or at least
close
80%.
to 20% of the season.
Yeah, you're right. Flipped it in my head. Okay, cool. All right, so
he'll be there for hopefully 80% of the season.
So, drafting him with the first round pick for him to sit for 3 games or 4 games maybe, and that's if you're lucky. Like, there's no guarantee he's going to be back in week 4. But I think you've got to move him down at least like 2 rounds worth of stock, right? Like, you've got to put him. If I had him at 10, I'd probably move him to around 34, 35, something like that.
Which is roughly where Evan has him at 37.
That would make the most sense to me. You also consider the fact that not only is he currently injured, he's also disgruntled. And the Colts are a horrible team and a horrible franchise and have a rookie quarterback who's not really prepared to start. And, you could honestly justify dropping him even further than that because I think he's going to have he might produce because he's great. But he's going to have a rough season playing real football and dealing with real consequences of playing for Jim Irsay and this dumb team. So, hope for the best, but I'd lean towards pessimism with him based off of just the surrounding circumstances.
Okay. Talk a little bit about our consensus number 2 tight end in our rankings. Each of us has him ranked as our number 2 tight end, Mark Andrews. He is our consensus number 35 pick. And specifically, I want to talk not so much about the gap between us because I think at this point we've sort of established, the way that Evan was grouping his players was to basically put like a whole tier's worth of one position in, and then he would like put a whole tier's worth of another position and kind of go not exactly a cycle. It's not like he went running backs to wide receivers to tight ends to quarterbacks and just kept repeating that. But, it was basically kind of that way. So you'd have a whole like run of a position and then a run of another position. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to kind of mess a little bit with the specific rankings there. But I want to talk more about the spread between our top 2 tight ends on our overall rankings, because I go from number 18, Travis Kelce, to number 40, Mark Andrews. That's a spread of 22 spots. Eric has him going from 8 at Travis Kelce to only 20 at Mark Andrews. So that's only 12 spots. And then Evan goes from 9 to 52. So that's a 43 spot drop between his top 2 tight ends.
Yes.
And honestly, I felt like, a drop of 22 was quite a bit. 12 seemed a little bit more reasonable. I don't know that I necessarily agree with having Mark Andrews as a mid-second round pick in a 12-team league. But again, when you're considering the fact that he beat Travis Kelce 2 years ago, was on pace to beat Travis Kelce through the first several weeks last season, I can understand not having quite as significant a gap. But 43 spots just seems a lot, Evan. What was it that made you put that many, repeats of, a couple of tiers of quarterbacks, a few tiers of running backs, a few tiers of wide receivers between those 2 tight ends?
Well, I mean, I sort of talked about how Travis Kelce's the best tight end. He's like head and shoulders above everybody else. And then Mark Andrews specifically is the second best tight end, but it's not as close of a gap between like 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, just numerically.
Well,
you think,
for
oh,
you,
well,
you didn't have
who's just
any
second
gap.
best?
You had Mark Andrews, T.J. Hawkinson, Darren Waller, Dallas
they're all
Goedert,
sort
and
of in
George
there together.
Kittle, all in one tier, like one after the
Yes.
other.
Yeah, because they're closer together to me.
But are they
I
that
don't
much
feel like
closer
they
together
belong in
where
the
you
same
wouldn't have a tier
conversation.
break in there at all? Like, you've already established that you're willing to have a tier of one player with Travis Kelce, which I completely
Yes.
agree with. I think you have to have a tier break at Travis Kelce.
Wait till you
But I
see
think
my
that you
third
should
tight end.
also consider having a tier break after Mark Andrews.
I mean, maybe.
I certainly
but
wouldn't put him and the next 4 or 5 guys all on the same tier. I feel like you have to have a tier break, if not right after Mark Andrews, then right after the next guy.
What do I have next? I don't remember.
So you had
Scroll.
T.J. Hawkinson after
T.J. Hawkinson.
after
Yeah.
Mark Andrews.
The Ravens also have a whole lot more weapons on offense than, they usually do. Like, usually the guy to stop is Mark Andrews. And
They have
while
more
that
weapons,
might-
but are they all going to be utilized to the detriment of Mark Andrews, I think is the question, because we have to keep
There's
in
only
mind
one
Odell
football.
Beckham hasn't played significant football in a couple of years. We don't know yet how good he's going to be. He's going to get some usage in that offense, but is he going to actually be taking away significant targets from Mark Andrews? Probably not.
so.
Zay Flowers is a really talented player, but we've seen most wide receivers, even today, we've sort of become a little bit, we've been spoiled with the likes of Justin Jefferson, where he doesn't need the entire first half of the season to break out. He just needs part of the first half of the season to break out. Jamar Chase broke out really early in his rookie year. But the majority of rookie wide receivers are still taking at least the first 8 weeks to get their bearings in their offense before they become a power player. Do you really want to, dock Mark Andrews and take him back into a lower tier, if you will, just
Yes.
because you're worried about the second half of the season being just a little bit less productive because of Zay Flowers?
Not Zay Flowers. I mean, the offense is different too. Greg Roman is long gone. He's not even coaching this year, like, for anybody. And that offense.
Everybody's expecting this offense to be more pass heavy.
Yes,
I don't know that I necessarily buy it's going to be that much more pass heavy as some people think, but the expectation is that they're going to pass more, which means that you can support having some of those other weapons, getting some of those targets, and Mark Andrews still get his.
Yes, but Greg Roman's offense, at least in the passing game, went through the tight ends. They regularly had 2, if not 3 tight ends on the field at the same time. So, like, that's why Mark Andrews got to be such a effective fantasy tight end, because the ball was coming to him. He and Lamar certainly have a tremendous connection, but the ball's going to be spread around a little more. And then the guys who's being spread around to are better than the jabronis that were there before, right? Like Devin Duvernay and Tylan Wallace and some guy whose name I can't remember, but his
Never even
face
heard of
is
Tylan Wallace.
exactly. Yes, yes, and he's been replaced with Odell Beckham Jr.,
Who's
So-
30 and injury prone and not as good as he used to be, and all that.
Okay, he's better than Tylan Wallace. Is
Okay,
he not?
maybe,
Yeah,
but
so-
are you 100% sure that he is a significant upgrade over your
Yes.
boy Hollywood Brown?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Based on what? He hasn't done anything in forever, and he's over 30, and he gets hurt all the time.
Yeah, I trust Odell much more than Hollywood Brown, particularly this year.
Trust
when
and
the
Odell
Cardinals-
Beckham in the same sentence. That doesn't make sense.
What didn't it make sense?
Because he hasn't done anything in like 6 years.
I just want to point
What's
out.
Hollywood Brown done?
A little more when he was a rookie than friggin' Odell Beckham Jr. has. He hasn't done anything since he was a Giant. That was the last time he was fantasy relevant, was when he was a Giant.
So I just want to point out that Todd Monken, the last time that he was coaching in the NFL, he was the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns in 2019. It was the Freddie Kitchens
and what was
year.
what was he doing the last time
Oh,
he
the
was
Freddie
coaching?
Kitchens year.
When he was
How did
coaching
that
in
go?
general, what was he doing?
Well, it was Georgia,
And he was doing what?
but
He's making Stetson Bennett look like a legit quarterback.
well, sure, but that's not really the point that I wanted to bring up. The point I wanted to bring up is if you look at the Browns offense back in 2019, and granted, we can debate whether that was Todd Monken, whether it was Freddie Kitchens, but we also, I think, have established that Freddie Kitchens is not what we thought he was.
I mean, he kind of is.
But in that offense, David Njoku only started one game because he was hurt that year. They had a tight end named Demetrius Harris, who you guys probably never heard of. I'd never heard of. And he was averaging about 5 targets per game in the 6 games that he started. That's a pretty decent target share for a tight end that none of us have ever heard of. I think that he'll be very happy to use Mark Andrews, a guy that, by the way, Lamar Jackson really likes throwing to. Like, you also have to take into consideration who the quarterback likes to target. In that offense, we also saw the running backs get a lot of targets. Nick Chubb, a guy that we don't think of as a pass-catching running back, had 49 targets in that offense. Kareem Hunt had 44. So that's almost 100 going to the running back position. That would suggest to me that an offense run by Todd Monken might like to go with some of the safe options. And what is the most safe, what is the safety net for almost any quarterback that has a good one on their roster, even more so than the running back? It's the tight end.
It's always open. Tight end's always open. Yeah, Evan.
And they've got a really good one.
I get what you're saying about, you've got other people to take the target share away, but we also make fun of Corey all the time for citing target shares, so you're kind of, you're mixing your metaphors a little bit on me here. I don't know what's going on. But generally speaking, like, when I see an offense get better, it means everybody benefits, right? Like, the pie is bigger. It's not a zero-sum game here where, yes, Mark Andrews might not get as many targets per play, but there's going to be more plays because the team's picking up more first downs. And even better for the tight end, there's more plays in the red zone because you successfully move the ball down the field more. So I think that there's going to be better opportunities for Mark Andrews in the offense, even if the total per play isn't what it used to be.
Looking down a little bit lower on our list, number 62, Alvin Kamara. He is our RB22, I believe both on our positional and our overall rankings, yes. Want to talk a little bit about him because we have a pretty wide gap there. Evan's got him as his number 41 overall. Eric's got him at number 61 overall. I've got him at number 88. And I'm just curious to get your guys' thoughts on him because I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what to do with Alvin Kamara this year. Obviously, he's serving a 3-game suspension to start the season, so you kind of have to move him down your draft boards a little bit automatically, right? So if Evan, did you not take that into consideration?
No, I didn't.
Oh, God.
But you didn't take that into consideration, and you still put him that low, though? That's kind of crazy. Right? Like, he's still a starting running back, and.
So, I'm even okay, even setting aside that, there's a pretty significant gap between you and me, Eric.
Sure,
You've got him at 61. I've got him at 88. What do we do here? Because like some of the other running backs we talked about, his efficiency ratings like really were bad last year, like historically so, to the point that it was like one of the first times I really was like hearing all like every week about efficiency ratings in the running game. It was because of Alvin Kamara and how bad he was compared to previous years. Then you add in the fact that this team does not like to run him in like goal to go situations. And they just added a guy who last year was historically good on the goal line in Jamal Williams. So already we're starting to we're seeing that Alvin Kamara's touchdown opportunities are probably going to be even lower than they already were. Does that move the needle for you at all? Is that what brought you down to 61, and you would have had higher hopes if somebody like Jamal Williams hadn't been brought into the offense?
I mean, it's not even so much Jamal Williams being there. It's the fact that even last year that Alvin Kamara couldn't get consistent goal line work. I mean, the offensive line was terrible. There was a lot of injuries along that, so that explains the drop in efficiency, which used to be historically great for Kamara. Like
Fair enough.
That was something that, everybody kind of overlooked about him, where it's like, wow, he's averaging like 7.5 yards a touch, for his career. But, he's also, as I pointed out, in anger quite a bit last year, a generational touchdown scorer, and suddenly he's become irrelevant in the red zone ever since Sean Payton left, because I sent him out of town. My bad, guys. I didn't know they would hire Dennis Allen. But anyway, I'm hoping that there's a little bit of a bounce back just because the quarterback play should be better. And particularly Derek Carr seems to like to use running backs when he can as a little bit of a safety net himself. But, yeah, the touchdowns are concerning, or the lack thereof. It feels like he's going to have to rely on making big plays, which he's capable of doing. But you also have to consider the fact that Kamara's a little older, too. Like, he's 27, I think, and he's been in the league. This is his 7th season. He's missing time because of the suspension. There's a lot to consider here. I think that he could be potentially a really nice sleeper option just because he has a history of being great, but I certainly couldn't rank him highly based off of the chance that he recaptures what he had done for the previous 5 years of his career and turns back into an absolute stud again. Like, fantasy-wise, it just feels like he's been relegated to in between the 20s work, especially like you said, Corey, with Jamal Williams in town, which again, good for the Saints because it's another good player, but it's also another excuse to not use your best player when he's at his best, which is in the red zone.
Next player I want to talk about just briefly, and this is just because this is kind of hilarious to me. Our consensus QB9. He's my 9th quarterback. He's Eric's 12th quarterback. He's Evan's 11th quarterback.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But on our overall rankings, I have him at 75. Eric has him at 100. Remember, Evan has him ranked lower than you as far as quarterbacks specifically go.
I have him 12th, yeah.
He has Kirk Cousins as his number 33 overall player.
You're doing this again? I thought we learned from last year. Don't do this.
The overall rankings don't mean much of anything, to be honest.
Yes, they do. They imply you would take him in the 3rd round.
Yeah, no, obviously not. But anyway, Kirk Cousins,
not obviously based on this list. So again, I'm not actually asking Evan to explain himself because we've already sort of explained this. We've talked about the way that Evan was going about doing this. I think that some of his tiers are a little bit too large, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I just found this hilarious. I have him ranked almost twice as far down my list as Evan does, despite having him ranked like 4 spots ahead of him on my quarterbacks list.
9 quarterbacks
doesn't make
the top
any
35
sense.
picks? No way. Please pick him, Evan, in the 3rd round. Please do it.
No, that's 12 quarterbacks who made it into the top 33 for
you're
Evan
right.
because he's Evan's 12th.
Oh my god. Well, that doesn't make any sense.
Oh, I have Kirk Cousins 11th and Jared Goff 12th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but still.
So 11 in the top
So
33.
a quarterback is going each, like, 1 out of every 3 picks for the first 33 picks?
It is funny, though, because he's got Cousins, and then Goff. Cousins is
Mhm.
number 33. Goff is 71. So he had another one of those tier breaks where he just has everybody just go ahead and cut the line right here.
All over the place, man.
I don't need any chicken at Chipotle. Y'all take it all.
So was this part of your tweaks, or did Barry have him at 33rd as well?
No. Y'all aren't listening to me, okay? Throw the overall rankings out, okay? They're garbage. They don't matter.
Well, that's
Compare
the
apples
exercise.
and oranges. So I have Kirk Cousins at the bottom of my tier 2 quarterbacks at number 11. So when you feel like you might be wanting to take a quarterback, you look at your quarterback list and you look at who's left, and you're like, well, I could get, a couple of guys left in my tier 2, or if I pick a different position, Cousins and Geno Smith and Tagovailoa, they'll be gone, and I'll be stuck with Jared Goff or Dak Prescott.
Well, but so
Speaking of Geno
That's
Smith,
the exercise.
our
What's
number
tier two,
our
though?
number 91 and 92 players on our consensus rankings. At this point, I don't even know what to do with these consensus rankings because there's just so out of
Don't
whack.
do anything with them. They don't mean anything.
But Evan has Geno Smith, again, our number 91 player, at number 32. He's got our number 92 player, Deshaun Watson, at 123. Now, I can't be too mad at that because Evan hates Deshaun Watson. We all don't like Deshaun Watson as a person. Evan I don't know if Evan doesn't
you still
just
like
thinks he's
Deshaun
going to be
Watson.
terrible, or if he just is so not interested in taking Deshaun Watson that it has him ranked
Yes,
really
all
low.
of it.
I have Deshaun Watson as my number 66 overall player. I have him as my number 8 quarterback. I hate it. I hate having him there. He's my number 8 quarterback. He's Eric's number 9.
17.
He is Evan's 17th quarterback. I'm assuming that Eric probably hates it just as much as I do, having Deshaun Watson ranked that high. I don't want him on my team. I'm also stuck on what to do in the situation that has come up in some of my mock drafts where nobody is taking him. Because when you're doing a mock draft, a lot of times it's going to draw at least some of its decision making from ADP. And I think there are a lot of other people out there who just don't take Deshaun Watson. He drops really far in drafts, and so his ADP is a lot lower than what his value probably should have it at, as far as his on-field production. I'm kind of stuck as to what to do. I don't want him on my team. I also don't want somebody else to get him at a great value, and because of that, end up in the playoffs and have to watch Deshaun Watson in our playoffs. I don't love that either. So I don't know what to do. And I'm not going to sit here and say, okay, nobody's allowed to take Deshaun Watson, because you're taking a player off the board who could be useful for fantasy.
I mean, I feel like once you get past the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks, you kind of stop losing that impact. Like the difference between the 9th or 10th guy. Like let's say it this way. If your rankings are suggesting that you pick Watson at a certain pick and you opt to then pick the next best quarterback that you have ranked, you're not going to lose that much value at that point.
And that's the thing. Like, my concern isn't so much for me losing the value of potentially having him. It's about I do that, and then another person does it, and it keeps happening until now he's, it's him and then the guy who was ranked like 10 spots behind him at the position.
But then at the end of the day, though, that guy that drafts him is still playing, by our rankings, a below average starting quarterback in the league. So, I mean, it's not like he's going to be a top 3 quarterback and we all have to pass on him because
right.
of
But while they're playing that below average starting quarterback, slightly below average starting quarterback, they also got better value at other positions.
Sure, they got better value, but that's towards the end where you're kind of picking sleepers anyway. Like, you're probably not. Again, it's not like you're able to get him in the 12th round instead of in the 4th. Like, you're probably getting him in the 12th round instead of in maybe the 7th or 8th. So you're already at the caboose end of drafting your starters anyway. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I don't think it's going to make a significant difference on who wins the title, because I also have, 1, hopes, and 2, some beliefs that Watson might just end up being booty butt cheeks this year. So, we saw him suck last year, and I know everybody wants to say, well, he hadn't played football in X amount of years, and he was suspended the first 11 weeks and all this stuff. I'm like, man, he never figured it out. Right?
Yeah.
And for a guy that I always thought was just a little bit overrated before all the stuff came out, just because I thought he held on to the football too long, and I thought some of the woes of the Texans offense weren't all everybody else's fault. Kind of like Russell Wilson when in Seattle those last few years, where like, are we sure this is all everybody else's fault but Russell Wilson? And then he goes to Denver and he stinks it up, and we're like, well, damn, we should take away his Hall of Fame plaque now. So, I think that's a distinct possibility for Watson to just end up being just kind of a guy, right? Like nothing special. Certainly hope for that because we all have reasons to dislike him, but at the same time, I do want to say anybody that picks him, I'm not going to shade you for it, right? We're playing fantasy football.
Yeah.
And, we've had unscrupulous characters in the league before.
We have. We still have, I guess he's a free agent right now, but we've had Kareem Hunt.
We've had Ben Roethlisberger, right? Like,
Antonio Brown was in the league. Like,
that's also true. So, again, Watson's transgressions are far more numerous than we know about anybody else, and the fact that he seems to have zero remorse for what he did, that is aggravating and reason to not want to pick him. But I'm also not going to shame somebody that ends up saying, yeah, but he is playing quarterback in the NFL, so we're playing a game here and I'm going to try to win. So go ahead and pick him if you want. I'm probably going to try to avoid him.
I don't think Deshaun Watson's going to be. He was bad last year.
Yeah.
What reason do I have to believe that he's going to return to just being a superstar in the league again? Like I didn't see it, right? He looked suddenly washed.
Yeah, but if it were to happen, it would make sense because of just the time off, right? Like there is enough room for uncertainty to suggest that he could bounce back, especially because Cleveland's got good players on that team. So there is a consideration for it, but I do agree he looked a lot worse than I thought he would the whole time, right? Like I thought the first couple weeks, yeah, he might be rusty and raggedy and stuff like that, but he never figured it out.
He almost got outdueled by Tyler Huntley and Josh Johnson or something. Like,
not great.
All of the quarterbacking in that game was just terrible from everybody.
And he might just be washed just purely on vibes too, right? Like, there's just the aura he had before was noticeable, and now that's completely gone.
In his first game, he gave his game check to some stadium workers who were horribly affected by the hurricane.
No, I remember that. Like that was one of the first moments where I was like, "Wow, this guy's a really good dude."
I liked him out of Clemson. Yeah, I thought he was cool. I love Deshaun Watson, but now,
now
it's over, right? Like,
yep,
he done messed up. So that's that.
All right, I'm gonna make fun of Evan for just one more player
Picking on
our
Evan
list.
Too much.
I know, but I have to make fun of him for one more, and then I'm gonna let you guys make fun of me for a player.
Oh, sweet. So I never get made fun of. Awesome.
None of yours were like quite that crazy. You had a couple that I felt like were a little bit too high. Like you have Javonte Williams about 35 spots ahead of me and Evan. But
I thought he looked really good.
Javonte Williams was
catastrophic injury.
Sure, but Javonte Williams was also really good before that injury, and he's had almost a whole year to recover because he got hurt early last season. It was like week 4, I believe.
Yeah,
and he was healthy throughout the preseason. He actually played in the preseason, so
I think that's
he could wind up being really good. So
the thing is overblown.
Again, a little bit crazy by my opinion, but not that outlandish, and there were a couple others like in a similar ilk, but no, like that was probably the most egregious, if you will, of your like kind of over rankings in my opinion.
I think he's gonna be fine.
Evan, number 75 overall player, Sam Howell.
Yeah.
Okay. So fine. Throw the overall rankings away. They don't matter. Even though that's the exercise. Let's put it this way and see if Evan can explain it. Because
what's about to happen?
Evan put the tier of quarterbacks that include Sam Howell, which, by the way, he also has Jared Goff in the same tier. He has Sam Howell and Jared Goff in the same tier, which I think is kind of crazy. But
Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be like the best receiver.
No. He put that tier of quarterbacks ahead of the tier of tight ends that includes Pat Freiermuth and Evan Ingram. He put
Evan's
tier of quarterbacks ahead of the tier of wide receivers that includes Mike Evans So he would take Sam Howell over Mike Evans in a draft. According to this, based on where he put that tier of quarterbacks compared to Mike Evans' tier of wide receivers.
Well, where's so what QB ranking does Evan have for Sam Howell?
16.
So like a backup quarterback.
Yeah.
And what's the ranking for Evans as a receiver?
His ranking for Evans as a receiver is number 32.
So not a starter, but maybe a flex option.
A potential flex, borderline flex.
Are we a little low on Mike Evans, or is he hurt?
I think he's
so.
low on Evans. I have Evans at 20 as my number 22 wide receiver. You have him 25. Evan has him at 32.
I mean,
He's Tom Brady's not walking through that door.
didn't matter
Right.
before. He had production with some bad quarterbacks. his whole
Evans has
career.
played with some really bad quarterbacks down there in Tampa Bay, and he has never had a season with less than 1,000 receiving yards.
Who was between
I
Jameis
understand.
Winston and Tom
I
Brady?
certainly understand the concerns about Mike Evans because last year, even though he did wind up with 1,000 yards, he did wind up as I think he was the wide receiver 16 in half PPR scoring. The journey to get there was less than optimal. He had a few really huge games where he was scoring I think he had one 40-point game, he had a 30-point game along the way, and then he also had a lot of games where he was really disappointing. So I understand being concerned about that, but he's a target hog. They're gonna throw the ball to him. I think that he's going to be a little. You can't be any less consistent than he was last year. I think he can only be more consistent this year.
So Mike Evans, again, I realize this is a long time ago. He was a rookie in 2014.
Okay.
He played in 15 games. He had 1,100 plus yards, and he had 12 touchdown receptions. Pretty good.
Yeah.
His quarterbacks that season were Josh McCown, Mike Glennon, and that's it. Those two.
Where was Jameis Winston?
He was playing for Florida State.
Oh, in 14?
Yes.
Yes.
He had the ball going over his head against against Oregon in the Rose Bowl. It was great. So, he's produced with everybody. He produced with Johnny Manziel in college. Right? Come
Johnny
on.
Manziel was
Johnny Manziel was
transcended in college.
Because of Mike Evans. Call it what it is.
Fair, probably. No, with hindsight, probably true.
Yes, definitely true. He had a ton of first-round talent on that offense, including Mike Evans.
He is getting older, though, so you do have to take that in consideration.
Sure, but again,
But,
it
yeah,
feels like we're writing off a 1,000-yard receiver with 81 career touchdown passes just a little soon.
Especially, his ADP right now has him wide receiver 33, which is actually just a little bit lower than Evan has him.
I would gladly take him.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to get him at that value.
That's.
I think it would be nuts if he actually makes it that far in
don't
any
think he
draft.
will.
He shouldn't. I don't think I would let him fall that far.
I mean, I understand. Again, older, but he's still 30, right? 30 is not crazy old for a wide receiver in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
So
Is he actually 30? I thought he was 28 or 29 still. He's
he
pretty
was-
young.
He turned 30 last week.
Okay.
I've got his football reference page open right now.
Nice.
So
there you go.
There you
Well,
go.
happy birthday to him. No, I stand by it. Just it's going to be such a downgrade at quarterback, right? You have the greatest quarterback of all time
But he also had a
throwing passes to you, and now you got
Baker Mayfield.
Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield.
But again, though, Tom Brady was not Tom Brady last year, right? We can acknowledge
Still better than these guys.
That's probably true, but
Yeah.
being
And,
better doesn't mean production goes down for the receiver because they're gonna have to throw the ball all the time.
Yeah, I have my doubts about this Tampa Bay team. It seems like it's kind of a mess.
I think they're
Right?
gonna
They
suck,
got so
but
good so quickly, and they got bad just as quickly.
well, yeah, because the GOAT came and then he left, but that didn't stop Mike Evans before that from putting up big numbers.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're talking about he played with Mike Glennon and Luke McCown, that was
Josh
just 10 years ago.
Okay, but
What does that have to do with 2023?
and why are we acting like when he played with Jameis Winston that somehow Jameis Winston was all-world quarterback? Come on.
I mean, he was better than the jabronis, right?
He's better than who?
All right.
Mike
I think it's my
Glennon
turn to
and-
be made
yeah.
fun of. We'll go ahead and
ridiculous.
move on. Our number 149 overall player in our top 150 just snuck in there. Our consensus tight end 15.
Oh dear.
Although
It's way down
he
the
doesn't
board.
actually show up in our top 18 on our positional consensus. The reason he shows up that high in our overall is because I have him ranked at 78 Eric ranked 175 players, did not have him ranked. Evan ranked 198 players, did not have him ranked. Taysom Hill.
Oh.
I teased him earlier.
What? Why did you rank him at all?
Because you have to take into consideration the fact that he's going to carry the ball some. He may throw the ball a little bit. I think that he's not going to throw the ball very much because they brought in a good quarterback in Derek Carr, at least better than what they've had since Drew Brees left. But if you think about his baseline, like last year, Taysom Hill only threw the ball 19 times. Right? So he still ended up, I'm pulling it up right now just to verify because I'm pretty sure he still finished the year as a top 12 tight end in at least in our league scoring, which is not too far off of traditional half point PPR scoring. Taysom Hill was the tight end 5 last year. He was the tight end 5 last year with 122 points. Now, again, the journey to get there is not fun. Let me pull up Taysom Hill's game-by-game log from last year because it was not an easy ride for him. He had 15 in week 1. He had 1.7 in week 2. Did not play week 3. Had 9 points in week 4. 36 in week 5. 5.4 in week 6. 10.6 in 7. 9.8 in week 8. Actually, this is not looking quite as bad as I thought. He had 0.1 in week 10. He had 1.7 in week 12. So he had a couple of bad ones there.
Of him to get a yard
but in between them was 7.8 and then 12.5. And then he had 10.8, 13.1, 14.8 from week 15 through 17. So it actually was not quite as awful as I thought as far as the, what the floor was. Certainly you had those, you had 4 games where he scored less than 2 points. That's not good. That's about 20% of your season. But the other games, it actually wasn't quite as egregious where it was like 2 36-point games and a bunch of zeros. He also had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 double-digit point games last year. That's actually not bad. I'm starting to feel like I might have actually had him a little bit too low, to be honest.
I mean, I get what you're doing, so I'm not actually going to make fun of you for this because like he has been productive based on the numbers, but just the uncertainty factor, it feels like if you really want him and he actually starts looking like he's going to be a part of the offense with any level of consistency, then drop some fab on him and get him, pick him up, right? But it feels like he's a guy you bid for if he proves to be valuable versus a draft pick.
And so that's why I want to now transition into a little bit more talk about draft strategy. I think this is a really good launching off point for that.
Glad I could help.
Yeah, because Eric gave us a lot of really good advice in terms of kind of looking ahead into your draft and thinking about at what points in the draft do you think that runs on certain positions might have? So you can say, okay, 3rd round, I think at this point, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of really good wide receivers on the board, but there's going to be plenty of good running backs. So I got to decide, do I want to take that top running back that's there before a run on running backs happens, or do I want to make sure I get at least one good wide receiver who's left, right? You can think about it ahead of time in that way. But another thing that you want to consider is, what is the ADP looking like? And you don't want to get too married to ADP, average draft position, especially if you're only in a couple of leagues, right? If you're just, if you've got a bunch of eggs across, dozens of baskets, you're in a whole bunch of best ball leagues, you're in a whole bunch of redraft leagues.
Come on.
I mean, I don't like best ball, but I understand the draw in terms of like you can be in a like 100 of them and not have to think about them. So if you're just like a gambler, sure, it makes sense. I don't like it for fantasy for myself because I like the fun of actually setting my lineup. I know that
managing your team.
Yeah, managing your team is part of it, and I feel like if I'm in one best ball, I may as well just be in 20 of them, in which case I'm not going to be checking every single one of them every week. I'm certainly not going to be making the time to brag to the guy that I beat every single week. It just doesn't make sense to do it. So again, you don't want to be too married to ADP when you've got one or two leagues, because if you're seeing Mike Evans is the 33rd wide receiver off the board, I can wait until 30 other wide receivers are taken and then he's going to be there. Well, he might not be in your league because the other guys in your league might value him higher and actually be willing to take him at their valuation. So, take some of this with a grain of salt. But say Taysom Hill is a guy that you do want to target.
Good luck to you.
Sure. But if he's a guy you want to target, you can say, all right, he's going like 158th on ADP. I don't remember exactly where his ADP is, but it's at least in the 150s, if not higher. Even if you have him ranked as like your tight end 5, you don't take him there. You don't take him when 10 tight ends have been taken off the board. You maybe, at that point, you're really kind of throwing your luck in with Taysom Hill. So you might not want to wait quite to the 150s, but you can wait until you're in the 120s or 130s because he should definitely still be there at that point, especially if a lot of other tight ends have been taken. Most people don't take 2 tight ends. So, keep that in mind. When you have players that you think could be a really good breakout candidate, you don't necessarily have to wait until, and pick up them with fab. Like Eric said, I think you can take a late round flyer on a player like that because he's going to be available there. So,
I mean, a late round flyer, I agree. Like a late round flyer is basically the same as a waiver wire type guy, because
except you don't have to spend fab. Or use your waiver wire priority if that's the way you operate.
If you want to pick somebody up, you got to cut somebody anyway. So like the guys at the back of your draft, like maybe this guy breaks out and maybe he doesn't. He's going to be on the waivers for week 2.
Yeah.
So if you guys couldn't tell, my draft is underway.
Yes, it is. It just started.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm picking 9th for the 4th time in 5 years in this league, which I'm. We'll see.
And this is a 10-team league.
Yeah, like this.
Jeez.
Again, and it's random picked, but somehow not so random. And there goes Travis Kelce. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, I'm coming up. People are flying on these picks, so I got to be ready to go. A little live action here for y'all.
Yes.
Coming in hot, so I got to keep my Cooper Kupp, and your boy is on the clock. 40 seconds to pick, so I will get back to you.
So we're going to let Eric focus on his pick there. You've gotten a little bit of advice on strategy for drafting from Eric and myself. Evan, I don't know if you want to talk about mock drafts or if there was something else you want to talk about, but what are some tips that you have to make your draft more successful?
Well, I mean, I would start with mock drafts. You need to sort of practice what you're going to do or what you're planning to do in your real draft so you can get a sense of what your team turns out to be when you pick it. And if that's something that you're satisfied with. Because you don't want to be stuck with a bunch of guys you don't like, or, you find that you are like reaching on somebody and then that costs you down the line. So I think it's important to just sort of practice what your strategy is, and if you think that is something that'll work for you. You also have to be familiar with how the draft platform even works. So, if you can find all the buttons quickly, I think that's underrated.
Yeah, and be careful with when you set players into your queue or whatever your platform calls it. I've seen situations where people used that as more of like a reminder, hey, like this is a player I want to target a little bit later on in the draft. As much as I hate ending up with like an auto drafted player, if for whatever reason, those are your first 2 picks?
Yes, sir.
So Eric's got Nick Chubb and Bijan Robinson on his team after that 9-11 turn.
Yeah, 9-12.
Or 9-12, yeah. All right, nice.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that.
That's a really good running back stack.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was saying, if something happens and you get disconnected from your draft for some reason, and your turn comes up and it passes before you get a chance to get back in, what's going to end up happening is that first player in your queue is going to end up being drafted to your team instead of who the auto draft player would have been. And if you're using that queue to remind yourself of potential late round flyers, well, then you just took George Pickens in like the 3rd round or the 4th round, which is way earlier than you should be taking him. So just, be aware of that. Be cautious using it in that way. I would suggest, rather than doing that, just having a pad and pen that you can jot those player names down rather than using the platform for it.
I always feel like if I use that thing, the guy who I have in mind just gets picked by somebody else. Like it always
that happens
that
too.
way.
That happens
So
too.
like I don't put anybody in there.
Somebody didn't do their research. What happened?
19th overall pick was Jonathan Taylor.
Ooh.
Okay.
Well,
Couldn't be me.
sucks for them.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite guaranteed he's going to miss the first 4 weeks, but it seems like it's trending
Well,
that way.
I thought if he's on the PUP list, he's guaranteed to miss.
I don't know what the
certain
deadline is for
Thought it
that.
was
I don't know
3
if it's already
games.
passed or if it's still coming up. I know that if he starts the season on the PUP, then he will miss at least 4 games.
Right.
But
But I said they put him on there, so
is that? I guess that's already done deal then.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And
Well,
I
there you
mean,
go.
if he's unhappy with how he's getting paid, right? Like even if he's not on the pup list,
Yeah.
is he gonna play at all?
Those are the questions. All right. So we've talked a little bit about draft strategy. Last thing I'll add is if you're in a league with people that you've been in a league with for a long time, try and get to know the tendencies of some of the people that you draft with, right? Try and find out if some of these players tend to pick running backs consistently in the first round. If you're drafting right behind them, then you're going to have to expect that there's going to be at least one more good running back off the board before your pick. Likewise with wide receivers, if you see it, some guys like to take a quarterback in the 3rd round, and you value Patrick Mahomes pretty close to that point, and you really like him this year, then you could consider taking him. Evan's top quarterback this year is Jalen Hurts. So Jalen Hurts probably has a little bit more wiggle room, or Evan has a little more wiggle room on when to take Jalen Hurts. But if you see it, there's guys who like Eagles players, and they tend to draft quarterbacks early, and you're picking right before them, might be a good idea to go ahead and take him there if you like him that much. So
I'm drafting currently in a league full of Eagles fans, so the Devontae Smiths and the Jalen Hurts and those fellas, they go pretty quickly, which sometimes works to my benefit. But they were all really good last year, so it really didn't help me. So
yeah. Let's move past the draft. In season, what are some things that you guys do to try and allow yourselves to be more successful during the regular fantasy season?
Well, I can't remember if I put this in the sheet or not, but make sure you have your like league platform alerts turned on for when there are transactions, and make sure that it tells you not only who got picked up, but also who got dropped, because you might want to get that guy.
Yeah.
One man's trash is another man's treasure. For example, in our fantasy baseball league, a couple of times, Austin Riley, third baseman for the Braves, just was dropped inexplicably. So, it's kind of important to know that, rather than like scouring through the list of available players and finding this sort of, diamond in the rough. Like
You also had, was it 2019 when Aaron Jones was inexplicably dropped?
Oh, yeah, I fat-fingered that one.
And then you didn't say anything, so I wound up with him on my team.
Oh, yeah.
You could have just said, hey, I accidentally dropped Aaron Jones instead of Jamal Williams. Can you switch them around? But no, it's like...
Who's the other? Was it Jamal Williams?
I'm
Who's
pretty
the
su-
other Packers running back?
Was I'm
Or
pretty sure it was
J.T.
Jamal
Dillon?
Williams at the time.
Yeah. The other guy. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
him.
two.
Who'd Eric take with his third round pick?
I drafted Chris Olave.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah,
There you go.
the 4th round.
Is he
pick.
going to be like more of a featured option? Did he win offensive rookie of the year last year?
No, he did not.
No, that was
Garrett Wilson.
yeah.
Yeah, Garrett Wilson was offensive rookie of the year. Ooh, Eric got Mark Andrews in the 4th round.
Yeah, I could have made some other selections, but like I said, there ain't gonna be no tight ends for a long time.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, you've got 2 good running backs and a good wide receiver. So I think, and again, wide receiver is Wide receiver is the position that you can most frequently find some value on the waiver wire.
Yeah, plus
running backs, you're really not going to find anybody unless there's a major
No.
injury, and there's a player that nobody expected to really be in a handcuff position.
Yeah, and I'm figuring I can get a receiver and maybe draft a quarterback at my 5th, 6th pick little juncture there. I could probably grab somebody. So
Okay.
feeling pretty good so far, but
Who are you thinking about a quarterback? Who do you think is going to be around then?
Herbert or maybe Justin Fields. Joe Burrow is already off the board. This
Okay.
league likes to run on quarterbacks a little bit, so yeah, we'll see. Devontae Smith just got picked. I thought about picking him instead of Andrews, but I really wanted the tight end. I figure it's much easier to find a value receiver later versus a tight end where I'm going to be drafting some guy who's going to get like 4 targets a game. So
So before your 5-6 turn comes, any in-season advice?
Yeah, if you have access to it, I kind of say this every year. Try to watch as much football as you can. Like if you can, red zone doesn't really cut it, to be honest. Like as far as real evaluation, it's great for finding out what the hell's going on.
Oh yeah,
it's awesome.
it's great for following the games live and following the action.
Sure, but like if you don't have any money, which is understandable because with your broke ass and all that, then you probably aren't going to buy NFL Plus. But at least try to be conscious of who's doing what, so that you can be aware of if somebody's available or potentially could become a valued option as a mid-season pickup. Like you're better off knowing who they are and what they're capable of before they start putting up the numbers, because then everybody's going to be up on games. So you want to be able to kind of figure out who's going to be good at some point and maybe stash them. You want to be a week early instead of a week late on them.
Yeah. My in-season advice would be don't spam trades at people, but also always keep an eye out on where you might be able to find value by making a swap with your league mates. Some leagues have rules that might make trades a little bit easier to come by. We've had a lot of trading in our league over the past few years, and part of that is because we can trade draft picks from the next year. That's how Steve in April has 5 picks in the first 3 rounds this year. Thank you, Evan, for that.
He also got himself in a little trouble when he tried to pull one over on the boy.
That's true. Although I don't understand why he was doing that, because he has 2 keeper options that are probably more valuable than what Calvin Ridley would have been.
Maybe wanted to squeeze a little bit more value out of his draft. I don't know.
But even like having him in the 8th round, I think he had other better options. So I don't think that really would have squeezed that much more value.
Right, but he also wanted to move up in a later round as well. So he was trying to get multiple pick swaps with him.
Interesting. So he was really, pulling an Icarus there.
It wasn't too much value. So like I said, I was willing to do it because it would have benefited my team, but it benefited my team more to just go get the guy he wanted in the first place. And I had the pick ready to swap out. So there you go. He didn't have
Are you actually going to end up keeping Calvin Ridley?
Of course I am.
Okay.
I don't have a better option.
You sure?
Who am I going to keep?
I'm pretty sure I saw a better option. I'm not going to tell you because
I'll
I'm going
double-check,
to let you figure that one out.
I didn't
and
drop
decide
50
for yourself.
fab on a guy just
right.
to
I
be
was
a jerk.
wondering about that. I was like, okay, I guess he's going to keep him.
What do you want me to keep Pacheco or something like that? He's going to be like a
well, I know you had been
option
thinking
at
about
best.
that, but I don't even think that Pacheco was the guy who was on my radar for you. Anyway,
I'll take a look.
One thing I want to say about trades is, like, if you're trying to make a trade, be sure that you're negotiating in good faith, right? Like if your objective in a trade is to win the trade or to totally screw your league mate over, then after this trade goes through, nobody's going to want to trade with you ever again.
Yeah, no,
right?
I mean, that's a really fair point. Obviously, it's great in the short term if you can win that trade, but you do have to think about long term. Are you going to want to be able to make moves in the future, and is anybody going to be willing to do that? So the best trades I've always held are the trades that are mutually beneficial. If it can be a little bit more beneficial to your team than the other team, great. But if you're pulling trades that are only going to benefit you and that are going to severely hurt your opponent, people are really going to be cool to any trade offers that you send in the future. Also, please don't be that guy that's like, hey, anybody want to trade? Yeah, sure. Okay, send me an offer. If you want to trade, send people an offer.
Yeah.
Okay, so please don't be that guy.
And make sure it's not a Mike Trout for Ryan Flaherty type trade.
Yeah, that's no good.
Yeah, nobody's going to counter that offer and be like, "Oh, okay, we're pretty close. I think we can get something worked out here."
Ryan Flaherty and Everett Cabrera for Mike Trout. How about
Yes. All right. We didn't really talk at all with our consensus rankings about defenses and kickers. Some leagues just say we don't like defenses at all. There are a lot of leagues that have completely gotten rid of kickers. I know Stephen April is in a league that replaced the kicker with an additional flex spot, and that's become a little more common. I personally enjoy kickers, and part of that enjoyment has come more recently since we've been able to add fractional scoring. ESPN added fractional scoring this year, but it doesn't work quite right. You can't, if you turn it on, then any field goal shorter than 30 yards will not be worth 3 points. It would be like 2.8 or 2.7 or whatever. I don't particularly like that. But with fractional scoring, it definitely makes the kicker position a little bit more interesting. You don't get 4 points for a 49-yard field goal and 5 for a 50. You get 4.9 for a 49-yard field goal, which is what it should be. Some people just don't like the team defense aspect. I feel like we've finally kind of found a set of scoring options for our defenses that I think make defenses maybe not like super predictable, because no player in fantasy is super predictable, but the good defenses tend to shine through. And I think that the number of points they score more than other defensive units, it makes sense for how much better or worse they are. So I do just briefly want to think about what are some defenses or kickers that we are targeting outside of the consensus ADP top 6 at the positions. So let's start with kicker. The top 6 kickers going in most drafts right now are Justin Tucker, Daniel Carlson, Evan McPherson, Harrison Butker, Tyler Bass, and Younghoe Koo. Do you guys have any kickers that you guys are targeting outside of that group?
I mean, I'm not targeting any kicker really. To be honest, like I'll pick Justin Tucker in the second to last round just because I'm a Ravens fan. But
Tucker might not be there, and in
probably
our
be
league,
gone
he's
before that.
definitely not going to be, because either Anthony Battle or William Battle or somebody ends up taking a kicker in like the 11th or 12th round every year.
Yeah, I mean, football or fantasy football is such a crapshoot, and it's exemplified with the kickers and the defenses. So like, it's anything can happen really. So I wouldn't get too worked up over who my kicker's going to be, as long as he's not a shankopotamus, right?
Right.
Like, that's really all you need. Just no shankopotami on my team.
Yeah, just get a guy who can put it through the uprights, because it's kind of tricky when you try to go based off of, well, who's going to have a great offense? Well, the problem with that is they score too many touchdowns. Like, you kind of like there's kind of a fine line there where the offense is good, but they score too much, and so you only get 1 point at a time versus having opportunities to consistently bang long field goals. So
with that being said, you think about a guy like Harrison Butker, and he does typically finish inside the top 6 kickers, despite being on an offense that scores a lot, because you're going to get those extra points after touchdowns.
Sure.
Plus, a good offense is going to sometimes stall out in field goal range.
Yeah, or
so you're getting a guaranteed baseline of some extra point kicks. Plus, you're going to end up with some opportunities to kick field goals along the way. So
Andy went to Georgia Tech.
And he went to Georgia Tech. There you go. So I will say my top 6 kickers coincide with the consensus ADP. They're not the exact same order, but it's the same 6 guys. So I had a little bit of a hard time putting together a group of guys that I would consider quote unquote targeting in a draft. Again, this is not targeting like, oh, I'm going to try and get these guys around earlier, like in the 14th or 15th round. These are hopefully they're around in the 15th or 16th round if I'm at the back of the 15th, early 16th. And I would take a guy like Jason Sanders in Miami. Miami projects to be a decent offense this year. If Tua can stay healthy, we saw that they were scoring a lot of touchdowns last year, so he's going to get into they're going to get in the end zone. He'll have those extra point opportunities. Plus, he's got a decent leg. He'll be able to make certainly the field goals that are inside of 45 yards. He'll have no problem with. Jake Elliott in Philly is a good option, another high-scoring offense. Greg Joseph is in Minnesota. He's got a good leg. Solid scoring offense, but not the elite touchdown generating offense. So you can expect to have more field goal opportunities. And because he's got such a good leg, that field goal range expands. Outside of those three guys in the consensus top 6, I think you're definitely in that streamer territory where you're going to be, you'll pick up a kicker for 1 or 2 weeks at a time, and then you're going to switch them out for somebody else, which, can be frustrating because a lot of times you wind up picking a guy who just scored, 15 points, and they get you 2, and you drop them, and they score 13 points. It is maddening sometimes. But that's how it works with the streaming. So you just gotta try and do your best there. How about defenses? I think defense is a little bit easier to try and find later targets. We instituted a Hall of Fame in our fantasy football league last year, and put a new class in this year, and several of the last like the last 3 or 4 defenses that have gotten inducted into a Hall of Fame because they were that historically good, a good number of them were drafted later in the draft. I think this past year we put the 2019 Patriots defense in. That year, Anthony Battle had them and the Baltimore Ravens. They were both top 3 defenses, and so he didn't even use the Patriots in every game. He only used them in like 9 games that season. Yet they were still the highest scoring fantasy defense in our league. And he got them, he drafted them after he drafted the Ravens. They were his second defense drafted. So I think they were like the 9th defense overall taken in that draft. So you can definitely find good options later in drafts. So right now, the consensus top 6 defenses are the 49ers, the Bills, the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Jets, and the Patriots. What are some defenses that we can target outside of that group? Eric is like in the middle of a round of picking.
Yeah,
So
I just made my 69th pick in the draft. Nice. Yeah,
Very nice.
And now I've got the 72nd pick.
all right, so we'll let Eric focus on that pick, and then he'll jump in.
Let me cook.
So Evan, what defenses outside of those 6 are you thinking about?
I don't even remember which 6 you said.
The 49ers, the Bills, the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Jets, and the Patriots.
I mean, not to be too much of a homer, but the Ravens defense. The Ravens defense isn't that good because they're a sieve up the middle and just get run on all the time, and they don't force enough turnovers. But for me, if you're thinking about defenses, I kind of take it on a week-to-week basis and look at the opposing quarterbacks that defense is going against. If you're playing a quarterback who's a rookie or who sucks or both, you probably want to get that defense.
I will say, so the Ravens were on my short list of teams to potentially bring up here. I'm glad that I prepared a few of them just in case. My notes on the Ravens, they've got really tough playoff games because they play Jacksonville in Week 15. They're a borderline top 8 offense in my projections. Then their Week 16 and 17 matchups are San Francisco and Miami. Those are 2 pretty good offenses. But during the fantasy regular season, the first 14 weeks of the year, the only top 8 offense they play are their 2 games against the Bengals.
Oh.
That's it. They're not playing against another top 8 offense in my projections during the regular season. So while you'll probably want to, be wary of starting them in the fantasy playoffs, it's a pretty good defense to support a solid roster to get you to the playoffs.
I mean, you got to get to the playoffs before you can start worrying about the playoffs.
Right.
So,
and they're a good option for that.
Yeah. I mean, I just sort of play the matchups.
Yeah.
You've got 11 guys versus just 1, so you can play the matchups.
Yeah, and again, when you get into those, the 7 to 12 range of defenses, we're starting to get into that territory where you're probably going to be somewhat streaming the position. You might have a defense that you can start most weeks, but they might not be an every week plug and play. But again, there usually is a sleeper defense or two that can be that plug and play option all year long that is going outside the top 6 defenses in drafts. So that's kind of what we're looking at and just thinking, is there one of those here? So Eric, do you have a defense that you would consider targeting, hoping that they could be that outside those top 6?
Like a specific defense?
Yeah.
Not really, to be honest. Like I don't really target defenses so much in the draft. I just take what I can get usually.
But is there a defense that you would hope could fall to you because you think that they could wind up being an every week plug and play? Outside of the Niners, the Bills, the Eagles, Cowboys, Jets, and Patriots.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to remind me of what the top 6 because I'm like,
Okay,
well, all right, so
Well, you're looking at your actual draft stream, not looking at our show notes.
I'm a little preoccupied, so give me a little bit of grace here. I haven't really thought much about it, to be honest. I don't want to sound like a homer and say the Saints because I think their defense could have a decent year just because.
I have the Saints on my short list as well.
Because in part because they've got talent on the team and they're in the NFC, weaker conference,
And
pretty
they're in
bad
the NFC
division.
South.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're going up against Desmond Ritter, a rookie quarterback with no offensive line in Bryce Young,
Yep.
and Baker Mayfield and the
and
decaying Bucs.
potentially Kyle Trask at some
Yeah,
point. That's
so-
not ruled out completely.
So yeah, like I think you could go any number of ways there, but I feel like the Saints. I'm going to say them just because that's just how I feel.
The Saints don't have one game all season, all 18 weeks of the regular season against a team I expect to be a top 8 offense. The closest they come is week 7. They played the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have just outside the top 8, as I've said before. Meanwhile, they have 6 games against teams I project in the bottom 8 of offenses, including in both weeks 16 and 17, your semifinal and championship week of fantasy. So, if the Saints defense winds up being good, they should be a plug and play pretty much every week of the season. The third team that I had on my list outside the 2 that Evan and Eric wound up bringing up, I think Indianapolis could be a decent sleeper option. They face Baltimore in week 3 and Cincinnati in week 14, and they do have a couple of matchups against the Jaguars, but they're going to have 5 bottom 8 offenses on their schedule this week, and their weeks 15 to 17 schedule are against Pittsburgh, second-year quarterback who has shown some flashes of being decent, but I don't think anybody is saying Kenny Pickett's going to take a huge sophomore leap this year. Atlanta in week 16, Desmond Ritter, and then Las Vegas in week 18. So I think that they're a decent option. 2 defenses I would recommend keeping on your radar, just in case, because these 2 defenses could be absolutely awful, but they will not be on rosters when we get to these
awful,
2 points.
But you might want them.
You might. So,
No.
the Atlanta Falcons,
Oh no.
starting week 5, after that, they have 7 games against teams that I project to be bottom 8 offenses and no matchups against teams in the top 8. So, if they're absolute garbage to start the season, don't just go and pick them up week 5, but keep them in mind. If they show that they can be even average against some good teams that they play early in the season, they could be a streamable option in the from the quarter mark on. Likewise, the Carolina Panthers, also probably going to be a bad defense. They have a really bad offense, which means they're probably going to have to defend more possessions, which could be problematic. But starting week 8, they have 5 matchups against against bad offenses and no matchups against good offenses. Again, that's top 8, bottom 8 that I'm drawing that good and bad line against. And they have one of those good matchups in the semifinals of your playoffs. So, again, take that with a grain of salt. If they are completely awful in the first several weeks of the season, ignore them, but that's the beauty. You don't have to commit to them in the draft. This is not draft these defenses and stash them. These defenses are going to be available week 5 and week 8.
Mm-hmm.
So if they show any competency at all, they could be a streamable option. Not necessarily in every week from week 5 on for Atlanta or week 8 on for Carolina, but they will have some games where they may be worth streaming if you don't have one of those top 6 defenses, and if you take one of the other defenses and they don't hit. So just somebody to kind of keep an eye out as we get into the season.
Something I want to bring up as well, with kickers and defenses, also check the weather of the game. Like if it's windy, like freakishly windy. I know I've seen like pregame in Buffalo where the goalposts are on their side because it's so windy. Maybe you don't want to start your kicker in that game. And likewise for defenses, if it's pouring down rain like a lot to the point where a field would be tough to even walk on,
you can do a slip and slide.
Maybe you might want to start that defense just because no offense is going to be happening in that game.
Yeah, there's probably going to be less offense. The ball is more slippery, which means there's going to be more errant throws, which could lead to more interceptions. Certainly, it could lead to more batted passes. You could have more fumbles because people are not holding on to the ball, which
all of it.
Yeah. So you get a lot of opportunities with those really bad weather games. All right. The last thing I want to talk about, we're getting close to the 2-hour mark, which is actually pretty good for us for our fantasy show. I feel like we usually end up going 3 hours.
This is like the second longest show of the year, usually.
So I'm glad that we're at least keeping it somewhat reasonable today. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to fantasy football is to talk about some of these settings and elements that we love and hate. And Evan, I'm just going to tell you, you've brought up keepers before. You're not allowed to bring up keepers this year. If there's something else you don't like as far as settings go, you can bring that up. But it is well documented that you do not like keepers.
It doesn't sound like you're documenting it.
I'm documenting it. I'm just not changing anything based on that documentation.
Oh, okay.
I love keepers, but I'm not going to talk about that. So this past year, we added a taxi squad to our league. And I thought it worked out decently, but we made some adjustments this year that I'm really excited about seeing how they work out. Last year we added one spot for a taxi. It had to be a rookie. And if you kept that player on your taxi squad from week 1 all the way through the end of the season, you could keep that player in the 16th round as an additional keeper beyond the one that we already have. We wound up only having 3 managers take advantage of that. Will Massimini had Rashad White on his taxi all year. Sean Kennedy never took Drake London off his taxi squad. And then Stephen April had Jamison Williams on his taxi squad all year. So all 3, they don't have to keep them all, but they can keep them all in the 16th round this year. Plus, they get their traditional keeper that we allowed in our league. This year, we've expanded it a little bit where you have a little bit more time to set your taxi squad. You get 2 taxi spots. You can only keep one of them the next year as that additional keeper. And they still both have to be rookies when you utilize that spot. But you have until week 8. After week 8, if you have a player on your taxi and they come off at any time, then they lose their eligibility as that taxi keeper. And if they show up in a starting lineup at any time in the season for any team before or after week 8, they are not eligible as a taxi keeper. So I just really enjoy when you can bring some strategy into fantasy football.
Strategy.
And I think this is a really fun way to kind of strategize and think. Well, so for example, last year, there were a couple of games during the regular season where Sean would have won his matchup if he had taken Drake London off his taxi squad and started him. He didn't do that. Now, it wound up, he made the playoffs anyway, and Drake London wouldn't have helped him in his playoff loss, so no harm, no foul. And he gets Drake London as a 16th round keeper. It was a risk that he took, and it paid off as much as it could have. He didn't lose anything by not activating him. Some people, like myself, thought, okay, I'm starting, it doesn't seem like Christian Watson is really doing anything. So I wound up dropping him off of my taxi squad. And I definitely regret that now. I could have had him in the 16th round this year, in addition to having somebody else. Instead, I did wind up getting him back through free agency, but at that point, he's no longer eligible to be kept. And I wound up starting him, and he helped me win a couple of games. And I wound up being the top team in the league last year. didn't do me any good in the playoffs. I lost in the first round, but I had the best team in the league last year. So, you win some, you lose some, but it just adds a little bit of a wrinkle, and you do have to kind of think about, how am I going to utilize this? Do I want to be more forward thinking and play this a little bit more dynasty oriented with my roster this season, where I can have that young player that I think could be a 16th round keeper next year, and potentially could then be a 12th round keeper the year after that, and a 9th round keeper the year after that? Or do I want to play for now? I've got this guy. He's playing really well. He'd be valuable in my starting lineup. I have some weaknesses that he could cover up, and I'm in a position where I could make the playoffs. So I think it adds some strategy in that sense.
I mean, thinking about keepers, I don't feel like that has any impact on, or like, it doesn't carry much weight during the regular season. Right, like, I don't feel like that should, a guy's keeper status should affect your decision making this year.
Well, generally not. Generally not. But again, this is a guy that could be your 16th. That could be that you could keep in the 16th round next year. But as soon as you put him in your starting lineup, you can't do that anymore. Right. Okay. So there's a very big difference there in future value. So you do have to weigh those options. The other thing that you do sometimes have to keep in mind about a keeper option is, do you want to trade this player that, for an asset that you think is going to help your team now, but you're now going to give this other guy, Justin Jefferson as a 9th round keeper, which, would have been the case last year for you. And then he would have been a 7th round keeper this year, by the way, Evan. You could have had Justin Jefferson in the 7th round this year.
Keepers are stupid, Cody. Really are. Yeah. Don't put any stock in the guy's keeper value during the season, because future value, this is fake football. The only value is present value, right? Future value is all made up. The next season is in 8 months after the previous one. A lot of stuff can change. So
a lot of stuff can
I'm
change.
Trying to win this year, right? And that's it.
All right.
That's all there is.
So outside of keepers and keeper adjacent, whatever, what are some settings that you either love or hate, Evan, in fantasy football leagues?
I mean, I guess I don't know that I love or hate anything, because it's not really, aside from keepers. I can't stand that. But it really doesn't matter, because, like, PPR versus not. I feel like good players are going to get more points than bad players. So, I don't worry too much about it. Just try to put the best team I can out there, and then, make my decisions when the time comes. So, like, keepers and whatnot, I don't think about it too much.
Okay. Eric, settings you love or hate in fantasy football?
Let's see. Settings I don't like, or so start with settings I love.
Okay.
Why not? I love trading picks. We used to not really be able to do that for future picks. You mostly just swapped picks within the current or upcoming draft for, like, we did that with keepers. But I think it adds a dynamic that, specifically in our league, is kind of you walk a little bit of a tightrope, because you don't want to end up in the sacco, because it not only affects your draft strategy, but it's also just humiliating.
Especially now that we've added a sacco punishment.
Sure, but if you end up being able to thread the needle where you tank your team, but still manage to not win the loser tournament, so to speak, you can end up in a better position the following year. It kind of gives you a little bit of hope for the following season. Whereas if you have a 3-12 season or whatever, and it's just, hey, I sucked this year and I didn't do anything to improve myself next year, it's a little bit like I just sat on my ass for 4 months and watched my team get bludgeoned every week and cried. So, that adds a little bit of a forward-thinking ability to how you play it, even though it's not a dynasty league.
Leapfrogging off of that, I'm going to add one more setting that I really like, and it's not a specific setting. I think that you can come up with your own version of this for your league, whatever will work. I like anti-tanking mechanisms. I don't like anti-tanking rules, insofar as I don't think that you should be able to say this person's not allowed to tank in fantasy football, especially if it is a keeper league, especially if it is a league where, you know, what you do this year can affect your draft position the following year. But I do like mechanisms that discourage it. So in our league, we have 12 teams and only 4 make the playoffs. Hyper competitive league as far as making the playoffs. The top 4 teams outside of the playoffs play in their own consolation bracket, where the winner gets to choose where they want to draft the next season. And we go down, and whoever ends up last in the bottom consolation bracket, they wait until the 4 playoff teams have made their choice of where they want to draft, and they get whatever is left. So are you automatically going to end up with the worst pick? Not necessarily. I think that we've seen over the years that you can be successful from any position in the draft. And we don't do, like the 3rd round reversal of the draft order that some teams do to try and balance things out. But you can wind up with a not so great pick, pick that nobody else wanted. You can add punishments for whoever finishes last and make sure that it's a punishment that has to do with the consolation bracket, so that you don't even want to tank to where you are the second to worst team, because then you're in jeopardy of losing that consolation tournament and having to do that punishment. So I like having mechanisms that discourage tanking rather than outright banning it.
I think
that said, you should always have to field a lineup of healthy players.
Oh, well, yeah.
Right.
I will say, though, getting rid of keepers, there's no benefit of tanking, right? Like, if you finish in last place and your team just sucks, it's like, if I, trade those draft picks. And
so I've been trying to add another mechanism by taking away keepers.
But
I don't think that's necessarily true, though.
No, because the reason I acquired a pick for somebody to take my player for this year, right? Mm-hmm. Like I got somebody's pick for this year.
Evan basically wants just total redraft.
I understand.
So
he
doesn't want keepers. He doesn't want anything from this year to have any impact on the next season.
So you can't trade future.
Future
I
picks.
don't mind trading draft picks. That's fine. But
if you do that, then you're automatically, what you're doing this year has to do with what happens next year. In which case, getting rid of keepers wouldn't necessarily inhibit tanking or discourage tanking. So I feel like tanking and keepers are two mostly separate things.
Yeah, they don't really run together. I don't think they have anything to do with each other.
Because tanking could also be just not putting your best player in there and having a different, still healthy player, but somebody else in there for your keeper, but still keeping him on your roster so that you can keep him the next year. Tanking doesn't have to be dropping all of your good players.
No.
I mean, there's zero benefit to losing, right? Like it shouldn't help you at all.
Right. There should not be a benefit to losing, which is why I say having mechanisms that discourage it, that make it so that benefit either is diminished or non-existent.
Yeah, you don't get a better pick. Shout out Tony Taters for a bases clearing double, by the way. Orioles lead 4-1. But anyway, you don't get a better pick out of it in our league if you suck, right? You don't get a good pick if you're great, right? Like you get the middle selection kind of before like the complete gump at the end.
Yeah.
But like it doesn't really benefit you to just outright stink and end up, there's no tank for Tua here or anything like that.
Right.
Or I guess in the case of this league it would be Justin Jefferson, but
right.
But yeah, I think we kind of got away from. I was supposed to say something I hate.
Yeah. So I mean, if there's something that you hate.
Oh right.
Do I hate anything? I don't know if I really hate anything. Do I hate stuff? I hate things that aren't fantasy football.
We've talked about some things that we don't really like that much in the past. Like we've talked about not liking, at least the two of us not really liking bonus points for like 40-yard touchdown passes, 100-yard rushing games. Evan enjoys those settings, and he uses them in the leagues that he runs. I'm not a fan of them. I'm not going to hate on somebody who does use them.
I am.
I just don't think that it makes a lot of sense for somebody at 99 yards to get 9.9 points and then at 100 yards to get 12 points.
Yeah, I don't.
12.
If it's a 2-point
I would
bonus,
give
if
them 11.
it's a 1-point bonus, still it goes from 9.9 to 11 off of 1 yard potentially.
Yeah,
I don't like that. I don't think that what's special about 100 yards versus 99 yards?
Nothing. But I mean, this is fake football where everything's made up and the points don't matter, right? Like.
Except that the points do matter because the points determine who gets bragging rights at the end of the year and potentially a trophy and in a lot of leagues money.
Okay.
So the points
Yeah,
absolutely matter.
Yeah,
That's the whole point of fantasy football is to get points.
Yeah, we're doing a 2.5-hour podcast on this entire topic.
On which players are going to get more points than other players.
By the way,
well, what I will say is that I tried to make the scoring as much like real football as possible. So like if your player has more of an impact in the game, good or bad, that should sort of correlate to your fantasy performance.
Right, but again, the player that runs for 99 yards had essentially the same impact as the guy who ran for 100 yards, right? Now,
Okay.
6 points for a touchdown. That's a huge bonus to have just for crossing that particular mark on the field. But that particular mark on the field is the most significant part of football. So it makes sense to make that be significantly more valuable in fantasy football.
all right,
I mean,
so-
I
Same
don't believe in
reason
points per reception.
that we introduced last year. We introduced points for first downs.
Yeah.
Because passing that mark is significant. It gives your team another set of downs to try and advance towards scoring a field goal or a touchdown. So you should, I think that it makes sense to add some things there. You have to be careful about how you implement some of those bonuses, especially if you're already in a league that awards some points for receptions, whether it's a point or a half a point. You might want to adjust that down a little bit if you're going to then introduce some sort of first down scoring. You also want to think about, do you give the same value of a first down to quarterbacks, to running backs, and to wide receivers? Or do you take into consideration the fact that first downs are most frequent for quarterbacks and they are least frequent for running backs? And so maybe we need to make them a little bit more valuable for the running back who gets it and a little bit less valuable for the quarterback who gets it.
all right,
When am I
well,
supposed to sleep after thinking about all this stuff?
well,
Oh,
That's why I figure it out and put it in the rule book.
well, then things that I hate.
I don't sleep.
Since I absolutely hate home field advantage bonuses.
Yeah.
That's garbage.
Oh,
Well, we did away with that
put
after
that
after our old league.
Yeah, after 1 year we
please
quit
go
on that one mostly because I complained, but
It was a valid complaint.
Yeah.
I recognize when some of the things that I implemented early on in my time as a commissioner, I was willing to recognize that it didn't actually make sense.
We also don't really even count those years of the league because it was a different league. It's
Right.
like it's like
It's
counting
not part of our history.
It's like counting who won the World Series before the World Series existed, right?
or
Like,
counting who won NFL
whatever they
championships
called it
before the
back
Super
then.
Bowl.
Yeah, like that. it's
We
not-
know that it happened.
That's the before times.
We know that
the
Brandon
national-
and Anthony won championships in that league, but that's not part of this league.
Was it just the National League pennant? Was that what they just that was it?
I think so.
Did they call it just the pennant? They didn't call it
It
anything
was
special.
the championship or the pennant or
Well,
yeah.
regardless, it doesn't count.
just won the NL.
It's fake. So yeah, it doesn't exist. So anyway, yeah, I hate that. So I am done my draft, by the way. So
Oh, let's hear your team.
okay, so at
That was a quick draft. That's 45 minutes.
45 seconds.
Imagine
between
that
picks, yeah.
instead of 3 hours.
Yeah, only 150
The
picks.
draft is the most fun day of the fantasy
It
year.
is. That's true.
It's exhausting.
Well, and also I think that for a decent percentage of it, there were some people that might have been auto picking. So,
That speeds it up.
But it was 45 seconds per pick, and the only one that was really winding down the clock was me. So because I was a little busy.
Yeah, you're double dipping right now.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, my quarterback is some guy named Rain Dakota Prescott. So I got him.
okay.
I saw you got Ron as your backup.
Yeah, I drafted the same two quarterbacks last year, which
That's funny.
it's also stupid because it didn't work out well for
The
me
year
last
that you
year.
won our championship in our league, did you have Dak Prescott as your backup behind Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah,
That's funny.
because Aaron Rodgers tore it up. I picked Prescott up off of waivers because Rodgers had an early bye, and then he ended up just being a stud all year. But he was more valuable on my bench because I didn't want somebody else to have him. Like I didn't even, and there was no, I couldn't actually trade him for anybody that I would put in my starting lineup because my starting lineup was so good.
It was.
So
It was really good that year. You had the number one quarterback, the number one tight end, the number one running back, and technically the number 2 wide receiver. But in our league, he had the most points at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I picked up Jordan Howard, and you made fun of me, and he ended up being great. So
You did.
because I spent $30 in Fab. Oh no. Anyway,
Spent a lot more than anybody else, but it worked out.
yeah. Then Nick Chubb and Bijan Robinson, as you guys know already, are my running back tandem. I got Chris Olave and DJ Moore as my receivers. Mark Andrews is the tight end. Breece Hall currently sitting in the flex, but of course, that's a flex. I as we talked about, I drafted the Saints defense.
Okay.
People kind of ran on them a little early, so I didn't pick them until the 13th round.
There you go. There's a potential sleeper pick who could be
And-
good, and
and
if
I
they're
also-
not, you got them late. You can just go into the
I
streaming
also
mode.
looked up who they played week 1 just to make sure I'll be playing them, and I will be.
Yep.
I drafted Tyler Bass as the kicker, so
Okay.
Bill's kicker is pretty good to have.
top 6
Yep.
kicker.
So the bench is more receiver heavy, just because I drafted later receivers, so I wanted some more depth at that position. Drafted Terry McLaurin, Mike Evans, and Brandon Cooks, and then running backups I got Alvin Kamara and Devon
A-Chain.
A-Chain. That's how
Yeah,
you say
Dolphins.
that. Okay, I was gonna
Yep.
call him A-Cane, but yeah, I thought. He was a sleeper pick. Like he was my last pick. Like
That's not a bad pick because the running back room in Miami is just so weird. We got Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert, and Devon A-Chain, and really any one of them could wind up like. I don't know that any one of them is going to be like the guy. I think it's going to be a running back by committee most of the year. But if somebody gets hurt, certainly A-Chain could get hurt. He's kind of a smaller running back. But the other 2 guys have an injury history. Jeff Wilson has been injured a lot before. Raheem Mostert has been injured a lot before. So
I literally picked him up with the second.
as
really like
as a
the
16th
A-Chain.
rounder, I like that. I think that maybe swapping out one more of those wide receivers for another running back in a standard league might have been nice, but I think you've got a solid
I've got
solid lineup
5
there.
running backs and 5 receivers on my roster.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty.
I tend to feel like half PPR you should be about even. Standard you should probably be slightly heavier running back, and full point generally slightly heavier wide receiver.
I mean, I
but-
agree with that in general, but the fact that the top end of my roster is so
Yeah.
running back heavy, I prefer to spend some of
Right.
the later.
No,
picks
that's
on
fair.
receivers.
That's certainly fair.
And of course, as you said, Corey, Aaron is my backup quarterback. So
Yep.
I always feel good about my draft at the end of this one, but then my team usually stinks. So we'll see how
I've
it goes.
found that 10 and 8 team leagues are just really difficult to, because I'm so used to playing in 12
Yeah,
team
like
leagues
you think this team's loaded.
that I'm like,
but
man,
it's
like
it's
this
10
team is
league.
loaded, but is it for a 10 team league? Is it for an 8 team league? Maybe still, but not as much as I'm thinking, because I'm looking at it through the lens of somebody who's used to playing in 12 team leagues and would definitely not have all of that talent.
Yeah. Plus, but I also could see how valuable or how much value I was getting per pick when I'm scratching off a lot of names below the guy I ended up getting his name before I drafted him. I'm like,
Right.
oh, I got him. I had Chubb ranked 5th, and I got him with the 9th pick.
There you go.
And then I got Robinson, who I had ranked 7th, and I got him with the 12th pick. So, that's good value early, which is hard to come by. So I'll take it.
All right. Well, unless there's anything else fantasy related or other sports related that you guys wanted to bring up, I think we've exhausted all of the fantasy topics that I wanted to make sure we touched on this episode.
Well, I mean, I want to point out, after all the grief y'all gave me about, the overall rankings, my positional rankings are right on par with what y'all said.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our positional rankings, there aren't too many that are really ridiculous. I will point out Kyle Pitts. I've got him as my tight end 6. Eric's got him tight end 5. Evan, you got him tight end 17.
Oh,
Yeah.
but I understand. Kyle Pitts deserves to be quit on at this point. Like,
Yeah,
I might not be ready to do it, but he deserves it. 100%.
Yeah.
I fully understand why.
The Falcons don't throw the ball. Okay, they're not going to. So quit asking, honestly, because they drafted another running back. They're just going to run it and run it and run it, and Kyle Pitts is just going to be standing there with his hands on his hips. Like, that doesn't help your fantasy team, now does it?
No, I
No.
suppose it does not. outside of that, a lot of our rankings do line up somewhat with each other. There's a few others that there's a bit of a gap, but nothing quite so egregious. Anything from you, Eric? Last thoughts?
Just have fun, man. Like,
That's what it's all about.
yeah, like just have a good time. Like, it enhances the experience on Sundays when you got a whole bunch of dudes going, and
Good.
it brings it up. Just don't get too caught up in if you win or you lose, because we don't really know what the hell's gonna happen. So anything could happen. So don't think that it's not an indictment of you if your team's bad. If your team's always bad, it probably is. But then figure it out. But don't get caught up in, oh no, my team sucks, so my friends think I'm a dummy. Like, nobody thinks that. So just have fun with it.
Yep. All right. So before we get out of here, quick reminder that our NFL picks contest is about to renew. If you are interested in joining us and picking against us this year, you can reach out to us on X at sportsballers18. You can reach out to us on Facebook. You can send us an email, thesportsballers@gmail.com. Or you can reach out to us if you're somebody who knows us personally, you can also just reach out to us directly. Let us know. Give us your email address. We will make sure that you are on the list that receives the ballot every single week to make your picks. We will be picking against the BetMGM spread as of 5 p.m. on Wednesdays. As I've mentioned before, we'll figure out half points just to make sure that we don't have any pushes this year because I don't like pushes.
We had 5 pushes all last year. This is a solution in search of a problem. I don't get it, but
I don't like pushes.
to alter hundreds
Regardless,
of
we are
lives.
all picking against the same spread. That's the most important thing, and it is still based on BetMGM.
But it's not anymore if we're changing the line.
It's true. It's true.
Are you guys really against changing
Yes,
the line?
I am. I am vehemently
Yes,
against
very
this. I
much
think
so.
this
All
idea
right.
is-
Well, Eric is more of an expert when it comes
I'm
to
not an
betting,
expert, but,
more than I am. So if he feels like it makes that big of a difference,
I think it does.
then maybe we won't do that. But regardless, it'll be based on BetMGM spreads as of 5 p.m. every Wednesday. So you'll be able to pick against the same spread that we're picking against. Picks are due before the first game of the week. Congratulations to I forget who won last year. I think Sean won the fan
it's
contest,
still
or
in-
did
I
James
think
win
it's
the
still
fan
in the
contest
document.
last year?
I think it's still in the doc.
Is it down to the bottom? I don't even
I-
have it pulled up.
We took it out and it only had, or no, Andrew and James tied last year. That's what happened. Andrew and James tied last year with 124 points, but they were behind all three of us. I had 145, Evan had 135, and Eric had 132. In any case, you can pick against us again this year. We would love to have you in that competition. Just hit us up and get us your email, and we'll get you all set up with that. Next week, Eric will be hosting as we do our NFL preview show. We will pick division winners. We'll pick playoffs, pick Super Bowl winner. We'll pick major awards at the end of the season. We'll talk about each division in some level of depth. Some will be a little bit less than others. That will probably be another marathon show, maybe even a little bit more so than this week, but it should be a really fun one the day before the regular season kicks off. So super excited for that show. And as we get into the season, we won't necessarily talk about every single game as we've done in the past. We're going to try and keep our shows a little bit more moderate on the length than they have been. But we'll make sure that we touch on some of the games where we have major disagreements on, or that just are more notable because they're going to be really fun matchups to watch. So definitely be sure to tune in next week for episode 251. But for tonight, episode 250 is a wrap. You can follow us on Twitter, as I said. You can follow us individually. I'm at Corey Puffett. Eric is at Quagmire69. Evan is at Evan_Ash13.
67, by the way.
Sorry, you said you had the 69th pick earlier, so I had it on my mind.
I did.
Eric is at Quagmire67. If you're not listening live on YouTube, you can find us wherever you're listening to us right now. Apple and Spotify tend to be the platforms most people listen to us on, but Google and Amazon also carry us. And if you are If you have another podcatcher that you really like, that you would like us to be on, just let us know, and we'll look into getting over there. Before we get out of here, last time that I hosted, I completely forgot to offer the opportunity for shout-outs. So let's go ahead and do that. Evan, any shout-outs tonight?
I guess no. I mean, shout out to all the workers at all these amusement parks I'm going to for putting up with me and putting up with your employers for not paying you enough.
Eric?
Yeah, shout out to Anthony Edwards, the Ant-Man, who, I don't care what Evan says, he's great and he's cool.
He's really good in Hustle.
Yes, he was. And just a shout out to him for, giving Steve Kerr the business a little bit because he deserved it. Apparently this summer during the Team USA matches against every other country, Kerr was coaching the team and initially wanted to have Anthony Edwards come off the bench as the shooting guard off the bench, even though he was clearly the best shooting guard on the roster. And he tried to use like some historic references to humble Ant-Man, and he told him that Dwayne Wade was willing to come off the bench behind Kobe on the 2008 Olympic team, at which point Ant-Man responded, okay, well, we don't have a Kobe. So, that was the end of that. And Ant-Man proceeded to dominate pretty much the entire tournament. He was the best player in it. He is awesome. Love him. Hope he gets out of Minnesota because that's just horrifying for everybody. Good for you, man.
Siberia.
Yeah, stick up for yourself.
I've got a couple of shout-outs. My first shout-out goes to Keyshawn Johnson, Richard Sherman, and Mike Irvin. And Michael Irvin. Because if you have not seen it on Instagram, Twitter, it's making its rounds. You have to find the clip of Undisputed where the three of them just do not let Skip Bayless get a word in edgewise. And the faces that Skip Bayless makes are hilarious. So funny. One of the funniest clips I've seen. I also appreciated Michael Irvin just completely screaming his head off for no reason and then just saying, I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've been on TV. I'm worked up. Loved that.
I couldn't believe that. I imagine that it's going to be a one-on-one show more frequently than having a panel.
But having all four of them
of a Hall of Famer, a future Hall of Famer, and a former number one pick, all talking about football in this game room with some 70-year-old white guy. Like, of course they're going to take over the conversation.
Literally looked like a fly on the wall.
He looked ridiculous. He looked uncomfortable. I had just a little bit of Zach Wilson vibes as he was sitting there, just looking completely out of his element. Normally he only had to contend with one black guy yelling at him for being an idiot. Now he has to deal with three of them, and they're yelling at each other too. Like, he can't handle that. It was great. And that was the rollout of the new Undisputed. Because we know that Shannon Sharp has moved on to First Take, where Skip used to reside. So, it was definitely an entertaining moment. Just kind of also love me some Irv. Anytime he's on TV, it's going to be entertaining. So,
I can't wait not to watch that while I'm at my job.
Oh, again, I'm not watching it either, but I'll catch the clips on
a couple clips here
social.
And there
can
be entertaining.
It's awesome. Love it.
The clips.
Second shout out, just want to shout out my wife Rashonda. Today was the first day of school. First day, it's not the first day of cross country practice, but it's the first day where we had basically everybody on the team out at practice. So, this is the time of year that I start getting super busy between school, cross country, broadcasting football games, and then of course, Sunday I just want to sit around and watch football all day. Thankfully, last year, Rashonda got into a fantasy football league that she's in again this year. So, we've been able to kind of, spend our Sundays together still and watching fantasy football and bonding over, either shared joy over our fantasy football team, shared sorrow over our fantasy football team, or enjoying each other's success while the other one is not doing so well. It definitely, I get super busy during this time of year. So I appreciate her supporting all these different things that I do, particularly during this 2.5 to 3 month stretch where I don't get as much time to spend at home. We do try to make sure that we dedicate at least one evening each week to just spend together and hang out. But, still, it definitely eats into my availability. And so I just want to give her a huge shout out for being so supportive. That will do it. Episode 250 is a wrap. Again, we'll be back next week. We'll be moving to our regular schedule of Wednesdays, unless otherwise announced, starting next week. So be sure to join us on Wednesday, September 6th for episode 251. Eric will have the con, and until then, take care.